for many years, and in my experience, once you start to ask the right question, the answer usually follows if you persist and you have the right intent. So what makes an oxygen and a carbon, or an iron, or a gold, whatever? What makes it that? And just the number, what is taught to us all, just the number of protons, neutrons, electrons, or even shells and stuff, it doesn't fit the bill. It doesn't give it, because not all the properties you can't explain all the properties that way. And regardless, where do they come from? And what I'm trying to show is that is connected to the actual structure of that nucleus.
So today on the Demystify Sci podcast, we have Edo Kaal of the Structured Atomic Model. And the reason that he's here is because we're starting an investigation into different kinds of atomic models. And we have to talk to somebody who has one. So Edo is our first guest. Why are we interested in the question of different atomic models?
Well, it's an interesting topic because we generally think of the model of the atom, which is called the Standard Model. The Standard Model is essentially just a schematization of the way that different processes unfold when you probe them in the laboratory. So it's an abstract model. And Edo is presenting a material model of the atom. At least it's a rendition that aims to be a structured architecture that can explain why the behaviors occur as a result of these different stabilities or instabilities, right? So it's a little bit of a different project that is actually trying to make an interpretation of the data rather than just restating it in empirical mathematical terms, which is, I think, is sort of the goal of quantum mechanics, which is let's precisely describe how these quantities are interacting in our detectors.
Well, the quantum mechanics approach is also interesting because the question is, how do these things interact when we slam them together under extraordinarily high energetic conditions? But the structured atomic model is actually more of what is the nucleus shaped like under normal conditions that results in the physical characteristics that we call atomic properties. And so it answers the question, why are some atoms radioactive and some not? What makes an isotope stable? How does the configuration of the interior of the nucleus reflect upon the larger atomic behavior? And I think that nobody else,
like what is like one of the most ambitious questions that it asks is, what is the relationship between the proton and the electron, which is such a fundamental question. You know, we talked recently to Walt Thornhill from the Electric Universe, and all of his worldview boils down to this concept of charge, the electron, right? And it's like, well, what the heck is a charge? And he's kind of like, well, you know, we'll figure that out eventually. And Edo has this really lofty ambition of being able to understand the proton, the charge, in respect to the electron, the opposite charge. And he's really circling around this idea that has a material basis, which I think is a very noble ambition.
And so we'll have more atomic models. We will have more conversations about the various frontiers of science, especially if you support us on our Patreon. It is at patreon.com/demystifysci. If you join, you get access to weekly hangouts. We are any moment now going to start publishing extra episodes on there, and you get to kind of help out and steer the ship. And we need it. We need your help because this is a labor of love that we pour all of our time into. And we want to make it better and better and better. We want to have conversations that are in person as opposed to just behind the desk. We want to organize conferences. We want to start the scientific revolution. And with your help on Patreon or through PayPal or Bitcoin or whatever it is that you have and you can share.
You can mail us loaves of bread if you want.
Yeah, just support the project because it's really important and we can't do it without you. So at the very least, tell all your friends. In the meantime, enjoy our conversation with Edo Kaal on the structured atomic model.
The scientific revolution starts now.
Demystify Sci podcast.
Let us see in the dark.
You're in the Netherlands?
Yeah, this is not normal for us.
Yeah. Is it, are things on fire yet?
No, it's just 1 or 2 days. But of course, people go full panic now. The earth is burning up, warming here and there on one hot day. 1 day of warm weather. Some people go bonkers, right?
I mean, we had a terrible spell of hot weather here last year. It was 45 Celsius for almost a week.
The plants actually burnt up. They were like black. It was crazy.
We would go walking in our neighborhood and there was one place where he's exactly right. There was just a bush and it was in this weird, there was a window that was lensing the light and it literally turned black. It charred. It was very spooky. And you walk around and you still see that the trees are very damaged and it was a very bad year.
Well, if they can get enough water, they'll survive. But suddenly, we have an influx of really warm weather from the south, from France, if you will. So that warm blanket is coming in. So the plants don't like that temperature shock, if you will, right? It went from 20 in 2 days to 40. So
yeah, exactly.
Is it pretty extreme? Like, do you have really cold winters there, or is it always sort of moderate?
So geology lesson, Netherlands, Western Europe, right? What we have is a predominantly influx from the ocean. So it's in the winter tends to be quite mellow, and in the summer it tends to be relatively cool. But if the wind turns around and it comes from the east, it comes straight from the land climate. So then we get the same extremes, right? But that happens every now and then.
It's interesting because when we lived in New York, New York is on the ocean as well, but New York had I think there were maybe 2 good weeks a year. It was like, yeah, in terms of weather, it was like there was about a week of spring and there was a week of fall, and both of those weeks were always fantastic.
Otherwise, just extremely hot or extremely cold. That's it.
Yeah, and like humid and just, especially like with the big tall buildings, you're in the canyons and it kind of feels like you're just like a little mote of dust that's getting, blown around.
I always imagined a tumbleweed passing by.
Yeah, exactly. And then getting stepped on by somebody and driven over by a cab.
Yeah, I really want to visit the Netherlands someday. It seems like a really cool place.
Have you guys been to Europe?
Yeah, but not to get. No, we have. Sort of. We hung out in Ireland one time. I had to give a talk in England, and Anastasia, her advisor, still doesn't know about this, but she skedaddled away. She ran away and met me in Ireland for a week or something like that. But no, we need to get over to mainland Europe. It's I keep hearing cool things about the Netherlands. We've been talking a lot about the homelessness problem in the United States. Like open drug camps are a huge problem here, like homelessness. And who's this author?
Michael Schellenberger.
Michael Schellenberger wrote a cool book.
San Francisco.
Called San Francisco.
Michael Schellenberger, come on the show.
Yeah, we need to get him on the show. But he references the Netherlands as an example of a successful program to deal with homelessness. Just because they have this whole carrot and stick philosophy where they don't just accommodate homelessness. They, I don't know if I should be saying you guys or they, but
I'm okay. I'm not easily offended. You will have to really try.
Yeah. Well, y'all have this policy in place, I guess, where you're able to, let people choose whether they want to be rehabilitated or whether and be given housing and basically get in this pipeline to improve their situation, or they can just be locked up. But there's not this same tolerant policy in the United, where we live. They just basically have these drug camps that are supervised and the state pays for them, and people can just be there, and they're really horrible scenes. There's rape and murder, and it's really bad news. And of course they're harassing the, normal sober population. And we're really, really haven't figured it out on the West Coast over here. So
I think it comes down to the policy that the governments have. How do I hide the nastiness of society? We do it by elevating everybody so it's not apparent, right? We do have homelessness issues, absolutely, but not as severe as you guys. And we don't put them in camps, not voluntary or mandatory. And I think it's just a matter of, how to deal with that nastiness that society brings forth. So in my mind, it's not that much more pretty over here, if you will. It's more hidden, less obvious.
Yeah, I don't know. I've just read about it. I'd really like to visit, but I know you guys have been dealing with like drug policy, like more open drug policies for a lot longer than the United States. We're kind of trying it on. Like our state actually just legalized essentially all drugs. Decriminalized, sorry. And they're still figuring, we're still figuring out how to deal with that because
I'm sure that somehow the corporations will take over and ruin whatever good thing we have going. So
open their markets up to the drug camps.
Never fear. Yeah, there's definitely the flavor in America, right, in the United States right now, of living in a dying empire, and so I feel like Europe can teach us a lot of like what that transition looks like as things fall apart. Like, what do you have to look forward to?
You're spot on. We are just waiting for the next European fallen empire, which is the United States, and then you guys belong to us as a was empire, right? And then you have to tone down.
We're trying to join the club, yeah.
It's interesting watching it happen though, because I didn't think that it was going to in my lifetime, and so it's very interesting to see everything starting to.
There's going to be a lot of that stuff over here too.
You think so?
Oh God, yes, just different. Just tune in the news. Dutch farmers.
Oh yeah, what's going on with that?
Well, in a nutshell, the government implemented, which is a very popular government, kind of like your current president, is so extremely popular, similar thing. And they implemented new law to adhere to certain levels of nitrogen oxides and ammonia expulsion from farms and whatnot, all that stuff. It's pollutant between brackets because it is actually the nutrition, right? The manure, the artificial fertilizer and stuff. And because we have a few patches of recreated original nature, where you should have very little nutrients, so these nitrogen oxides, which is important for the plant growth. I think you guys, biologists, I don't have to explain that to you, how important that is.
We also try to grow plants somewhat unsuccessfully sometimes.
Well, that happens, but those little patches of nature that are kind of like recreated back to the Middle Ages, which is kind of nice because you get some rare special plants and insects and whatnot, which is cool. But then all the surrounding area still deposit some of that nitrogen oxides. So it is polluting.
You get like these blooms of different species where they shouldn't be or something like that.
Yeah, so it's different habitat, right?
Where they shouldn't be. Yeah, I don't know. It's like
right.
Humans have a hard time managing everything. We're like, we got to control this and control that.
Well, the issue is the government made a new law, and a month ago they announced we're going to apply the law, and that means we're going to mandatory buy off the farmers, and when they take that money, they can no longer be a farmer ever.
Whoa.
And those levels that they want to meet, right? So according to the law, is in the practicality will mean 50 to 90% of the farmers will have to go.
Is there going to be enough food? Like, who's going to make the food if the farmers don't make the food?
Well, I think the plan is to automate it, and the way that it worked in the United States is that over the course of the last century or so, you went from having tons of small farmers running plots, and you actually have roughly the same acreage in cultivation, but they're in the hands of super producers.
I think the Netherlands
all the farms are super producers here.
You guys are playing with vertical farming too, from what I understand.
So, you guys, right? Us Dutch farmers, right? No, there's nothing chauvinistic here. But look, the Dutch farmers are really, really successful in production per hectare, etc.
Oh, no, sorry. When I say super producers, I mean like one company like Tyson Cargill or...
Yeah, but that's not the game.
What I'm saying, what I imagine might happen is that if the government buys off a tremendous amount of the farmers' lands, like what's going to happen to those lands? They're probably going to be the large corporations will probably buy them. No.
What's going to happen? No, the farmers are unwanted, so it's more like an excuse, this environmental thing, because they want the land for redevelopment purposes.
They want to build like housing and stuff on it.
Yeah, housing, industry, roads, and they have big plans over here. So the farmers need to go.
Yeah, I don't envy being, I wouldn't want to be a farmer right now or any time in the last 100 years, really.
Well, imagine this. You have a farm, and it's been in your family for 3 or 4 generations, which is not uncommon. In comes the government. You have to go. Here's a sum of money, and you cannot be a farmer again. Bye
Well, it's
bye.
really weird to me that there isn't some kind, I mean, this is I think the epitome of an unjust law, that there isn't some kind of program to be like, okay, if you can figure out a way of stopping the runoff from your farm, right? Because there's techniques, like Paul Stamets has some really, really interesting permaculture techniques where you isolate the land in such a way where all of the areas where there's runoff, you build these berms. The berms have mycorrhizal relationships and mushrooms grow there, especially I think like Stropharia species are really good at digesting all of the E. coli. Like if you've ever seen, mycelium will literally eat bacteria. Like it's a carnivorous mat. And so there's definitely ways that you can fix this, and they'll take
Sounds
the
expensive.
nitrogen. It's literally wood chips and mushrooms. Like
The farmers are saying that there are a boatload of other measures we can take. And the past decades, they have taken a lot of measures, which did reduce the problem tremendously. And then comes the government and they make idiotic quotas. Even if they do everything, you cannot make that norm. You can't even reach it. It's idiotic.
Who's driving this policy? I don't totally understand. Is it driven by like single monolithic industrial actors? Like who's pulling
sponsoring it?
Yeah, who's sponsoring this policy? Like I don't know how it works in your country exactly, but here we have lobbying, right? Where companies can get involved and basically push the Congress people around to making different decisions that benefit them.
So we have many more parties than you guys do. Basically, you have 2, and maybe an independent there. But we have like 20 parties, of which 10 are more or less relative, big enough. Not that the others aren't important, but you're talking really lower numbers there. So about 10 relevant parties or so, and they have their policy, and there are quite a few green and leftist parties. They make up the government, never a rightist or a central thing. And now that I don't want to choose any political color here or anything, but this is happening, and the green lobby is extremely powerful nowadays.
Who's paying their salary though? I guess who's paying the Green Party?
Well, that's just the party. So the party has their ways, normal ways. That's normal for a party. There's no nefarious stuff there. But you have to ask the question at some point: whose agenda are you serving, meaning an individual politician or a party?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to understand. Like, are their intentions good? They're just like, it's one of those situations where the road to hell is paved in good intentions, or is there just somebody subverting an otherwise like good narrative for their own profits, essentially?
I'm speaking on a very personal basis here right now, right? It's an opinion which is worth nothing.
I'm just trying to understand, yeah.
I would argue the last one. This is quite nefarious agenda, what's happening here. This is not per chance.
Well, there's definitely, I think that it's obvious that there are large interests that have settled on a decarbonizing, like, environmental mission. And
so it's just sort of lockstep with that mission plan in general.
I mean, it's really, I think so. I think that it's really, it's a weird thing because it's hard to point to the environmental movement and be like, we shouldn't protect the planet. And I think that there are legitimate aspects to it, which is that if you don't push on economies, they'll maintain their kind of, they'll be burning gasoline for things for forever. And you can make the argument that electric cars are no better, and so people are pointing in the wrong direction, and solar panels pollute and we should be doing nuclear, but there is this huge thing that is pushing people towards taking care of the planet.
But it also seems like it's like a thing where city people are telling the country people like, hey, we don't like what you guys are doing out there in the country, because we want to like have that nice pristine area. We talk about this all the time, where it's almost like they're trying to make like a nature park out of the people in the country's land.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's
for better or for worse. I wonder if it isn't. This is such a complex issue where like people really have the best intentions. It's really easy to recruit support on the basis of, hey, take care of the environment. And then, you walk on the backs of all these people who are actually living in the environment.
So you guys have biology. That's your forte, right? That's your specialty. You know a lot about it.
Benderberry's a better biologist than me.
What serves the environment? Does anybody ask that question?
Yeah, that's the great question. That's a great question. What is
the environment? What is the environment?
What is the environment? It's basically everything, right? It's a crazy word. It basically means everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's the sum total of the basic building blocks, which is everything from water to nutrients.
Idea.
I mean, it is, yeah, right? It's not like one place. It's literally.
What is the optimal environment, or what should my environment look like around me, right? That is the question that we have to ask.
Depends on your values, right?
I can actually answer it. And I think that the optimal environment is one that is diverse, right? Like, if you ever have an ecosystem where there's one being and it takes over the entire ecosystem, that's almost always a disaster. Like, that organism's going to die.
You know ecology, I can tell immediately. And I wholeheartedly agree, because it's biodiversity. People think forests are per definition a good sign. Not necessarily, right? If you have a changing landscape with water and creeks and ponds and little hills and whatnot, you get much, much, much more biodiversity, much more life usually, right? A forest is relatively rare. I'm not saying forest is bad, right? Saying that. But it doesn't have to be a rich ecosystem, right? And it doesn't have to be everywhere. We need farms, we need trees with fruit, whatever. It's part of the environment. We were part of the environment. And what the governments, and especially the green lobbies, are doing is plucking us away from the environment and try to make something silly, sustainable, human design thingy.
There's definitely this feeling of like humans are unnatural and they don't belong in the environment. And if we could remove humans from nature, then nature would be okay. But I'm very suspicious of that, because nature has been evolving side by side with humans for,
if you look at the people that are really pushing this, that's why I was trying to get to the bottom of it. Like in the United States, they're like these huge hedge fund managers and like people with enormous wealth that are pushing. When you really look at who's funding these agendas, it's like, these are super rich people who have like country houses with servants and stuff. Like, they're sure as hell not going to give up their, manor or their plantation in the hills or whatever.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of eugenics at the root of this. I really do.
Yeah, it's hard to not see that.
The whole CO2 agenda is just geopolitics, if you will. It's meant to make everybody believe, again, and this is very much a personal opinion, you can debate it, but my opinion there is, this whole agenda is meant, the global is meant for people to believe that we are powerful enough to change the climate, which is nonsense, which is absolutely nonsense.
It's hopeful.
I'm very adamant about that.
It's arrogant.
I'm not saying we cannot do things. Most people don't believe in chemtrails. Now, I will show you the pictures of my sky in a warm week, one warm week, no chemtrails, 2 days of chemtrails, no chemtrails, and then the chemtrails again. So there's no weather pattern changing. It's not that the upper atmosphere suddenly got cold or anything. And the lines are going crisscross from horizon to horizon.
We actually met with a Harvard scientist who's planning that kind of thing. It was kind of interesting. He's essentially studying. He wouldn't admit whether it was being done. He actually was adamant that it wasn't being done right now, but he had a great understanding of how it would be done and the effects of that and so forth, and sort of based his whole career around the ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's pretty openly being discussed. Like, this is not.
I live in that reality already. Whatever people say, it's happening for years already over here. And
man, YouTube just took this video off the internet before we even got started.
That will change your weather. The sun loses at least 30, 40, 50% in power. Talk about an impact on the environment.
Yeah, it's kind of the idiocy is that people like they don't think about like the long range effects of this too much, right? Like even talking to David Keith, he's just kind of like, oh no, like the acid rain will dissolve, like it's not that big of a deal. And you're like, really? Like, are you sure about that? And he's like, yeah, they're just like so blasé about it. Just so,
I mean, I
so
think
like,
that's the hubris of the pattern of human hubris over history, which is that we come up with some technology and we convince ourselves that the technology is fine, there's no problems, we'll apply it, we've thought about all of the things, we've dealt with all of the problems, don't worry, it's gonna be great, and then you do the thing and people are like, what? And it turns out that it's just built into our process of developing things.
we have a friend who's working on. That's a lot of airplanes.
Yeah.
We have
You
this.
see that?
Yeah.
It's pretty intense.
Now,
I
mind
assume.
you, 2 days is blue, then suddenly you have that. For
Does the
2
weather
days.
change after?
I mean, there's an argument to be made that like the condensation conditions change from day to day and so forth. We have a friend who is working on this app right now that's supposed to be aimed at problem solving. Shout out and all. And he has this idea. He has this really smart point that any problem solving pipeline should investigate the new problems that result from solving your original problem, and then you should rinse and repeat essentially until you can actually clean out. You find a solution that minimizes the additional problems that you create also. And I feel like that hasn't really made it into the technological human psyche at this point in time. It's quite fascinating.
There are a lot of issues. There are a lot of psychological issues. That's what I say in physics too. We don't have a problem in physics or in science. We have a psychological problem.
Mm.
People believe in what they want to believe. That's pretty much what it comes down to.
And I think that that's the case across the board, which is that people are grasped by their desire for outcome, and they're grasped by their desire for the story that they want to have and the way that they want to see themselves. And so they pursue various odd ends in the name of that vision, and it doesn't always work out. And I think that that's just kind of, whether that's in science or that's in society. And I guess that this is a really nice segue, because you're here to help us kick off what is a longer investigation into alternative structures of the atom, because we
just structures of the atom, because there's hardly, there's a little bit of talk about structures in terms of orbital shapes. Like the chemists kind of get it. They've probably been the most structured minded people in all of atomic science, but we really want to start investigating the deeper structures, and you've been working on the nuclear structures, and I guess the structure overall of the atom too, since it seems like you're saying the overall architecture flows from the nuclear structure in your model.
Right.
And so yeah, we're pretty stoked to learn more about this. We've are we allowed to talk about your book, by the way, that you sent us? You have a book coming out about this model,
Well,
which
the book is already out. And
Oh, okay,
can be
okay.
bought, so,
okay, cool. Fair game then.
and it's just structured atomic model, yes?
That's okay.
So I think that my first question, which might seem kind of obvious since you've been working on this for a long time, but why have a structured model of the atom? Why is that important? As opposed to, and like, how does it change the way that people have been thinking about the atom?
Most people are probably like, wait, what do you mean? I thought that we had a structured model
Yeah, right? Like,
of
they're
the
like
atom.
thinking about, they're like, I've got the protons, I've got the neutrons, there's like the thing that whizzes.
Yeah, how did you stumble on this?
That's exactly the point. There's this thing, and then it kind of sort of works. And when you dive into it, in what is out there, what everybody can learn, and what you can learn on universities or on Wikipedia even, you will find no answers as to how it is organized. So allegedly there are protons, there are neutrons, a bunch of electrons around it. And then we have many, many atomic models, and none of them are in agreement, and none of them solve everything, and none of them talk about an organization of those nucleons.
You're talking about like the Bohr model and the clouds and things like this, and
yes, and
is that what you mean by many models? Or?
If you invoke quantum mechanics, then it will say, you cannot determine speed or location at the same time, etc. So there's uncertainty principle. And those things do not resonate with me, meaning I couldn't accept them, first of all, because they don't sound logic. And second of all, no matter what I tried, there's not a word whispered about that nucleus, basically, except, protons, neutrons, and that's about it. And there's an amount of them. That's all we know. But it doesn't mean anything. So if you look into it, another problem in what I would argue is a problem in the quantum mechanics realm is we deal with point particles because it's so easy to deal with. But there are no point particles. Protons have an actual dimension. They are a sphere, or at least we can see them as a sphere. So the moment you accept a proton to be a sphere with an actual dimension, and I have an element with 50 or 60 of those, that means there must be an organization, because I could not accept a chaotic, swirling, strange thing, if you will. So
where do we get the dimensions for these protons, and how do we know the dimensions of these?
Well, if you can look it up anywhere, it will say something to the effect of 0.8.
Is it from a scattering experiment, or is this like there's some sort of, obviously you can't take a microscope and look at a proton. Can you tell us about how people determine the dimensions of these things?
Oh God, I have not really looked into that, how they precisely did it. I did it at some point, but I can't remember now exactly how they do that. I'm sorry, I don't.
No worries. Yeah, I think it's some sort of scattering experiment. I imagine with either with cathode rays, with some electrical readout, or it's with some high energy radiation. We'll figure that out. But so you basically say, look, this thing has a size. A point particle is not a reasonable way. Obviously, the rest of nature has structure. Like everything has like some sort of architecture, and that's basically how the physical world is organized. Why don't we talk about the architecture of the nucleus? That seems totally valuable and noble goal to set forth for yourself. I'm surprised that nobody's been doing that so far.
I was surprised too. I was surprised too there. Yeah.
The fundamental the sort of the fundamental thing that you're tracing, it sounds like, is the geometry of the arrangement of what's inside the nucleus. Is that a correct interpretation?
Well, so when you take that sphere and you start looking at the amount of nucleons, and at the first I didn't distinguish between protons and neutrons on purpose because they are both pretty much the same if you look at them as S-spheres, right? So they must be arranged. And by looking at the periodic table, we know which elements are stable with what amount of protons and neutrons. So if you look at the lithium, it's predominantly lithium-7. So it's very stable with 7 spheres. And there's only one way you can organize 7 spheres, that it will be in a geometrical stable pattern, right? So it's a ring of 5 with 2 on top, or 1 on top and 1 on the bottom on that ring. And if you look at that shape, at that structure, and you start mapping that on the periodic table, so on the elements with their corresponding numbers, then a correlation started to occur between that structure and the actual elements, if you will. So that's what told me, hang on, this may actually be a truthful connection there. So that's
like their behaviors reflect the patterns that you find by organizing them based on packing density. Now, this is all assuming that the proton is this spherical shaped thing also, right? Why did you pick the sphere for the proton? Or the proton-electron pair, as you call it.
Well, it's the smallest. There's many reasons, of course. It's the smallest imaginable aggregation of matter, if you will, right? If you put it in any other shape, it's not optimal. And since we are dealing with strong forces pulling together, it makes sense that you would take a sphere. Now, arguably, you could say, what is a proton? I don't know what a proton is, mind you. It could be in a donut or a toroidal shape. There are many theories in that sense. But regardless, even if that is the case, you can see it as a spherical entity or a thing, whatever that may be. Right?
And I think that it's worth mentioning at this point that one of the most important assumptions of your model is that neutrons are not separate.
They're not a new kind of particle.
They're not a new kind of material so much as they are a pairing of electrons and protons. which is kind of an old idea in a way. I understand you're sort of revitalizing it. There was an English chemist in the early 1800s named Prout that essentially who proposed that all atoms were essentially built out of hydrogen atoms. And if you look at it, a hydrogen one is basically just a proton and an electron. And I think that it's a really interesting idea because basically the atomic masses do scale more or less with the mass of one of these simple hydrogens. And so it's kind of it's an intriguing idea. And I suppose Prout got in some trouble for other reasons, and his ideas were sort of disregarded once the electron became the buzz of the day, and people got really excited about this idea that no, there was this other particle, and then it was like, oh, well, there's the positively charged proton, and then, people kind of let this idea disappear.
But the observation that a neutron, when it decays, turns into a proton and an electron is kind of the thing that brings it back into, okay, well, what's going on? How does something that is a specific type of particle decay into two other things that are in the nucleus if it's not somehow the same thing? And so you have this very interesting construction, which is that you have like multiple types of electrons. So you have the electron that lives in the orbital, and then you also have the electron that lives inside the nucleus, and it plays multiple different parts. It there's one type that glues the protons together to create the fundamental building block, and then there's another type of electron that holds together the various units, right, of the building block.
That would be an interpretation that may be the case in the first. So there are three classes that we distinguish, right? Now, mind you, they are still all three electrons, right? So there's no distinction in that sense. But if you look at the buildup of the whole atom, of course, everybody knows the concept of the outer electrons, right? The valence electrons, those in the orbitals, etc. And then in this model, of course, where we say there are actual electrons within the nucleus holding the protons together. Well, that is, of course, debatable, but they are in between those protons. That is the basis of the model. And that single building block of two protons with one electron in between is a basic building block, kind of like a brick in a wall.
And just to reiterate, this makes sense because under your model, and really following from Prout in the early 1800s, the neutron is just a proton-electron group that is somehow inactivated. It's not a full atom at the moment. It's kind of crammed into the nucleus or it's been integrated into the atoms somehow. So people listening to this might be like, what the hell? There's no electrons in the nucleus, and this is not the electron that you're thinking of. This is the electron that's included in the neutron, essentially. Under
we
this
are
model.
already in, this is a correct remark that you gave there. Yeah, many people will go now, hang on, but there are already a whole bunch of arguments you can make here. So let me just say, there is a phenomenon known. You can look it up. Everybody can look all this stuff up we're talking about. There is a thing that's called electron capture going into the nucleus. Question, where does it go? Well, of course, now we invoke the positron and the annihilation of each other, etc. So there's a whole topic there already. Yes, this is also an old idea, right? Before we started to accept quantum mechanics in its current form, we're talking about our previous century in the beginning, the 30s, 40s, around that area. But until then, it was understood that it were protons and electrons. So the model of a hydrogen, a bunch of hydrogens together, was not that strange and not that far off what I'm saying either. And the neutron, there is such a thing as a free neutron. So please don't misunderstand me. There are free neutrons. But what is it? Well, it is a one-on-one ratio, if you will, of an electron and a proton. And the nucleus is on average 1:2, meaning 2 protons, 1 electron. And in mainstream, we will say one is a proton, one is a neutron, and I will say there are 2 neutrons and 1 electron, so different ratio. So there is a free neutron, and it can stick to a nucleus if you're talking about an extra neutron, but it has to bring its own electron to stick to that nucleus, if you will, and you can pluck it off again under the right circumstances.
So I have kind of a foundational question. We're talking about this stuff. Do you treat them as actual objects? Like, is the proton an object, or is it like? Because
You mean like a material?
yeah, like, is it made out of something, or because the way that we're talking about like the movement of the electron and the movement of the neutron, and I know that you said that you're like, well, we don't know what a proton is, and that's fine, but I'm trying to think of it because quantum field theory would say that everything that's down there is just vectors, right? So you have vectors that tell you something about the fields, and that's what's there. But that seems like if you're measuring qualities of something and you're getting a mathematical readout, you must be measuring some thing.
Matter has a property called mass, right? Or
Yeah,
charge.
exactly.
What is a proton? I really don't know. I'd like to say that is the one question I will never be able to answer, because that is what the creator did. What is a proton? In my mind, to be more specific, there is only one particle, and that is a proton, an actual, what we would call matter, mass, a particle. That would be the proton. What the electron is still to be determined in my mind, but in the model, we treat it as a particle, if you will, but in a duality with the proton. So meaning the proton is heavy, the electron is light. The proton is positive, the electron is negative, right? The proton is actually smaller than the electron. The electron is larger. So it's kind of like a yin-yang or a duality. So we treat it as a diffuse particle, but I'm not saying it's a particle. I see it more as an electron is an actual connection between two protons. If
like
that connection would not be there, they would not be aware of each other. They could not be sticking together in that nucleus.
It's really interesting to read your work and consider that perhaps the electron and the proton are really just two aspects of the same structure. Like maybe they're just two pieces of the same material that are moving in different directions or something like that. I mean, these are still heavily schematized concepts that don't necessarily have we move forward and we have all these clues from these different experiments and scattering experiments and particle collider experiments, but we're still sort of piecing together what the actual materials are doing down there.
Yeah.
And I think that modeling the electron as the substance or the motion or the phenomenon that allows for binding is also really useful, because at least if you're saying that you have the outer electron and you have the nuclear electron, and in both cases, in the valence shells, that's going to be the mechanism that atoms use to bind to each other. And inside of the nucleus, the electron is also the sort of the glue. It seems like it's basically like Velcro almost.
That is how we use it and how we look at it. But we are the first to acknowledge we don't truly know here, if you really zoom in on it. But that is no different for any other mainstream look at things, right?
I love how you say that in your book several times. Like you're the first to acknowledge that science is never done. We're just looking at the nucleus in a new way for the first time in a very long time, at least, or if not ever. And this isn't the end all be all story. It's just like, hey, this is a starting place for how we can start to look at the atom a little bit differently. And they're really quite beautiful too. I want to say, like, if people are just listening to this, they sort of look like little molecules or soap suds or something like this. I can kind of imagine them as bubbles, these very intricate bubble-shaped atoms, which is quite interesting. I wanted to say one thing though before we move past beta decay, because we were talking about the neutron being essentially composed of electrons and protons. I got into a heated argument with a couple of my friends a couple of our friends who worked in the space industry, and they were not having it at all. They were very upset that I suggested that the neutron could simply be a tightly bound, basically an electron-proton pair that changed configuration somehow. Because they said, there's this neutrino thing. What's up with that? There's all this extra energy, right? They're like, the energetics don't work out. You can't say that.
Right.
what do you make of is that the binding? Is that the binding energy that's being released into the system? Is that what the neutrino represents? Or yeah, tell us about that.
Well, the neutrino is used for many explanations, and you can always give it just the right properties and the right values to make your equation fit. That's kind of how it's treated.
It's leftovers.
Yeah, so it's the leftover unknown, if you will, and just that is it. But it was the electron anti-neutrino was proposed or created, if you will, in the first place to match the spin within the quantum mechanics, so the spin of the particles. So in the free neutron decay, the neutron decays into proton and electron. The problem is they all have a spin of a half. So in their mind, mathematically, that did not fit. So you add another part.
Because spin, just to clarify, the spin has to be conserved, right? You need to have the same amount of spin. It's angular momentum quantity. And so angular momentum has to be conserved when you have any sort of transformation in nature. Yeah. And so they've added this particle in to balance it out. It's quite interesting.
Right. So as long as you are living within the quantum mechanics realm and you accept that as your working space, your working model, your tools, your understandings, your perceptions, your concepts, then you have to accept that. You know, there is a neutron, there is a neutrino. But within the model of the structured atom, within the structured atom model, we don't need a neutrino. I'm not
Why
saying
is that?
Because spin is an artifact of the quantum mechanics, how it's used. It's mathematical.
But it's also a measurement of something, right?
Spin is never measured, I believe. But if I say something wrong within the quantum mechanics understanding, I do apologize. I am not an expert on quantum mechanics, right? I'm trying to do something else here. So please, people, forgive me if I say something wrong within that realm. But as far as I understand it, it's not something directly measurable.
I think it must be measurable just because there's these entanglement experiments where they measure the spin at different locations.
Well, maybe it is.
Yeah, so basically they place a sample in a fixed external magnetic field, and then the spin-generated magnetic field of each electron interacts with that applied field, right. And they can detect fluctuations in that, and that way they basically are evaluating spin. So it does seem to be some kind of physical property of the atoms. And this is actually something that I wanted to ask, which is that you mentioned kind of in the beginning of the paper that you sent us, where you're like, the structured atomic model is working within the context of old models of the atom, not the new models of the atom. But basically, it sounded like you were saying that there were two visions of the atom, and that the structured atomic model is occupied with an older vision of the atom, and not with the sort of the quantum mechanics version.
In a way, it's going back to before quantum mechanics, right? Particle physics, if you will, but then greatly simplified in a new jacket, if you will, completely new understanding. That's how we started out.
I think you nailed it when you said that the primary problem with using with just reading quantum mechanics on its face value is that it relies on these point particle things, which are obviously have nothing to do with material architecture per se. Like, you can't build a house out of point particles, right? I think that's the main issue with just taking quantum mechanical statements on face value. And a lot of the interpretations, like, let's get one thing straight. Math doesn't tell you exactly what's happening. You have to interpret the math. And a lot of the interpretations we get from the quantum mechanics, they're not terminating on something physical, because, like, you can't build a structure out of point particles. Zero-dimensional things can't sum up to anything.
So that is maybe a good. That is maybe a good thing to respond to. So what the structured atom model shows, in first place, is the direct correlation or causal relationship between the structure and the number, of course, and the elements and their form, their stability. So when you look at the periodic table, it's quite an odd thing. There are many regularities there are periodicities there are columns there with all kinds of similar chemical properties. So, the earth metals and the alkaline metals and halogens and the whatnot. So how come you have shells, right? Now, I know there's a quantum mechanic answer, but what I'm trying to imply here is when you look at the structure, you see a repeating of a certain structure at the end of a branch because it's a branched thing and it grows outward like a fractal almost. And if you repeat those structures, you will see you're always in that same column. So just that understanding, or the jumps between two elements with how many extra nucleons are there. In the mainstream, we're talking about how many extra neutrons and usually one extra proton. That's the next element. But just one extra proton and one extra neutron doesn't always fit. Sometimes there are steps with 6, 7, or 8. So what's in between? Why does that not work? And the structured atom model deals with all those little issues or little enigmas, if you will. So the correlation between the structure and the actual properties of the element, that comes floating up, if you will. That's the key thing here.
And I think that is the final frontier for fundamental physics, is taking all of these patterns, right? The periodic table is essentially a tabulation of patterns, right? It's like these behaviors all grouped together here. This, whether the behavior is mass or the behavior is, electronegativity or any other pattern, right? It's reactivity, it's decay properties. You group all these patterns and then you have to step back at some point. And really quantum mechanics is the same thing. All these patterns of the way these detectors are behaving and stuff. And you have to step back and be like, what in the heck could actually be making these what structures what kind of mechanism can we imagine that would result in these patterns that we're well aware of? And it's kind of dumbfounding to me that, it seems like for almost 100 years, people were sort of just like, who cares what the mechanisms are? The patterns are robust. We can measure them in laboratories. We know that these patterns work out. We can make bombs. And it's like, yeah, you can do all that, but we still don't have a structure for what causes these patterns to occur. Why are they happening? Why is the binding energy as it is? And I think that's what you're trying to get at.
Well, the binding energy is a whole different ball game, and we do talk a lot about that in the book. And we haven't solved it entirely, but nobody has, right? Nobody can do that exactly for the whole periodic table.
But you're showing how different elements come apart, right? You talk a lot about transmutation, which I'm hoping we can get into. But you talk about the assembling of bigger molecules from smaller ones, or the fission, the degradation of, I call them molecules, but nuclei. What are they called? Nuclei? Nucleons? Yeah. The nuclei, right? Assembly of bigger nuclei from smaller and vice versa. The way that you can predict this should have a structural basis, essentially.
It has to have some kind of, it has to have
some material basis.
There has to be something, right? Because I think that this is something that I really like about the structured atomic model, because you're like, look, there is a pattern here, but nobody has a model for why the pattern is here. Everybody's just like, I don't know, it's a magic pattern. And you're like, I don't think it is magic. Like, I think that we can go to the geometry of the nuclei, and by looking at the geometry and packing density, we can figure out why it is that things behave this way. And you're talking, it's a very material scientist way of looking at it, right? You're like,
absolutely,
we have strain, we have stress, we have these things that they have a geometry where they shear on each other and they fall apart in these predictable ways, and you can track that.
Why should it not be like that? The whole nature is built up like that. And then, with all respect, you are taught at a university, well, the moment we go within the atom, everything changes and it's a completely different realm. With zipping in and out of existence particles, we can determine where they are. They are treated as point particles. There is no structure. So I'm totally with you. And I cannot accept that. That's what we started out with. I cannot accept that image, and I cannot do anything with it. will.
And so this is actually, I want to pull this quote. So in the introduction to the paper that you sent us, it says, the standard model is frequently mentioned in this context and used as a convenient collective for some 36 model varieties. However, we should differentiate between the various existing nuclear models, insofar that most of these models that structured atomic model can be compared to are of the old school variety. The quantum chromodynamics and quark version of the standard model of the last few decades is, in our opinion, not well suited to make predictions about nuclear structure. Why?
Because they don't look at it. And you can't, because you're working with point particles for starters. And you're working with neutrons. And the neutrons do not do anything within the nucleus. Not really. But we do know that the neutrons are important for stability. Try and take away a few. Look what happens. It will start decaying. So how come, that works together? How come there is a neutral particle that doesn't do anything but is related to the stability? Then the protons that are left over are usually repelling. But then we invent another force, the strong nuclear force, to keep those together. So the further you go, it doesn't improve your understanding. And if you look at the structured atom model, anybody can look at it and go, right, you don't need even words yet, right? There's a structure there. There's a reality there. And the reality is, this is how the elements are structured. And you can see that in the whole periodic table buildup. What can you do with it? Now, well, one of the things we hope we can expand on, at least, is, you already mentioned it, is research and experiments, nuclear experiments, fusion and fission. So allow me to make one good example that's in the book too. Maybe you were going to go there, but if you look at the splitting of the atom, most people understand a little bit what we're talking about, splitting of uranium, whether it's an atom bomb or in a nuclear power plant. When it's split, it doesn't split evenly. It splits in about 140 nucleons, new element, and in about 90-ish elements. Together they were the uranium. So why does it split so unevenly? Even better, it doesn't split evenly. It only splits unevenly. And there is no nuclear model that explains it until you take the structure into account and you break like a tree, you break off a big branch, which is then the 90, and the leftover is the 140-ish. So now it suddenly makes sense. Now we have now we start to get a new understanding whereby we can understand, well, hang on, this is how fission works. This is how fusion works. This is why you can get those weird results. And then you have to do a whole lot of other things, but yeah.
I think that this all starts from a confusion that most people on the street and even people who study nuclear physics, they let's back this up. Why do they think that protons and neutrons are built out of quarks? Well, what is a quark? Well, a quark is essentially a scattering pattern that you get from some sort of experiment, right? And instead of being so there's 3 different scattering profiles that you can get from quarks. So they give them different names, right? And we assume since there's 3 scattering patterns, there's 3 objects down there. But that's not really, that's just, that's a wild interpretation that doesn't make a ton of sense, actually. Because then it leaves open the question of well, what is the structure of these quark things? And then when you start doing that, you run into problems with their dimensions and their masses don't sum up properly. And you get into a weird world if you assume that the quarks are material actors. And they seem to be more a collection of behaviors than a collection of material actors. And so I think the confusion sort of starts there. And I think that's, if I understand you, that's why you're sort of not really interested in starting with building something out of quarks, because you're I don't think that's a good material basis to investigate the structure from, something like that.
Again, I apologize if I say something wrong because the world is ever developing and I cannot know everything. But to my knowledge, protons have never been dissected or dismembered into whatever that may be. And nor can we. Quarks have never been directly identified.
They're associated with these different scattering modalities, from what I understand. Yeah. And so there's 3 different scattering modalities, and yeah. I just see it as a reification of a consistent and predictable measurement, right? It's like we can get this same pattern when there's, when the proton is probed in this certain way. And so this pattern of measurement is interpreted as a particle. And since particles in most people's brains are some sort of material, then bingo bango, stuff's made out of these measurements, essentially.
Because I mean, again, this all comes down to the fact that, and you kind of mentioned this in your in the book and in the paper, which is that a lot of the particle zoo comes down to that they're smashing stuff together. You take an object and you hit it really, really hard, and it rings the bell of the fabric of the universe, whatever you want to call it, and you can measure that resonance, and that resonance is these quarks. And Shiloh's right in saying that there's basically all of these characteristics that the proton gives off when you break it in this really violent way. And the question is, if you can smash something in a specific way, does that necessarily inform you about the thing in the first place?
Like if I smash this computer with a hammer and you take a picture of it flying apart, can you put the computer back together? And I would say probably not.
Does it tell you anything about the functionality of the computer after you've smashed it? And it's just like, it's...
Can you put a plane back together? Yes, we can, because we know how a plane looks like. But if you don't know what a plane looks like,
that's the really interesting assumption at the heart of this collider science, which is like, it's a really interesting presumption. I mean, I'm not saying we can't learn anything. Certainly we learned something from this, but it's not as simple as people make it out, which is like, oh, well, now we know this. Now we know exactly what a proton is made out of. And it's like, no, you just know this predictable way that the proton behaves when it's under these stresses. And you don't even know what yeah. Go ahead.
Regardless, I mean, I'm not trying to diminish the argument or the topic you're raising here, but regardless, even if it's made up of quarks, it's still a proton within a nucleus that is the main fundamental particle within that nucleus.
What you're saying is that you have to choose what scale to operate on. And
yes.
It might be that there's something that is inside, because if you say that the proton is an object, is a material, or is a standing wave in some kind of material. Like when I imagine atoms, I think of a very protoplasmic, gooey, sort of vibrating object. Right? Like I imagine this kind of, if I'm thinking of a hydrogen, it's this kind of toroidal breathing little galaxy, and at the center of it is some kind of knot, right? So the outside of it folds, it's kind of a vortex that it folds into itself, and at the center is some kind of standing resonance inside of the material that gives what we see as the nucleus, right? It's in motion. And so when you talk about people determining the size of a proton, what they're doing is they're shooting a beam of electrons, whatever that is, and they're seeing how it scatters, and that by virtue of that scattering, you're mapping the surface of that standing pattern of the structure. And so if you want to ask the question, well, what is the standing structure made out of? Then okay, I guess you could, right? You could spend your life devoted to that, but
right,
you don't need to in order to be asking the larger question, which is the one that you're because you're talking about, like, I want to understand how atoms behave and why they behave a certain way, and we don't have a model for that.
The periodic table, if you will.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing I wanted to understand. What makes, well, that's a question that I've asked and posed out loud for many years, and in my experience, once you start to ask the right question, the answer usually follows if you persist and you have the right intent. So what makes an oxygen and a carbon, or an iron, or a gold, whatever? What makes it that? And just the number, what is taught to us all, just the number of protons, neutrons, electrons, or even shells and stuff, that doesn't fit the bill.
Why not?
Because not all the properties, you can't explain all the properties that way, and regardless, where do they come from? And what I'm trying to show is that is connected to the actual structure of that nucleus. That is the thing that comes first. Based on that, you will have your orbital system. Now, I can't tell you exactly how that works right now just yet, because we still have to develop some software to even show it. But at least that is how you can start. Now you can expand on it. Now you can work on this, and now we can develop it. But like I said, the structure has to come first, so we understand it. Now we can look at the atom in a very, very different way. And we need to accept, in my humble opinion, not so humble maybe, but there are electrons there, right? And there are many clues as to that is a truthful thing. There are experiments that are being done today that point in that direction very, very strongly as well. So they come to the same conclusion completely independently.
I mean, I think that it's a noble goal to seek an explanation for why the proton and electron are linked. Like, this is definitely a step into that quest, which is extremely important. I think it's one of the biggest questions in physics is what connects the proton to the electron. I mean, it's just as big of a question as what connects the Earth to the sun or gravity, anything else that there's this invisible, mysterious force that's, quote unquote, holding things together. And so we certainly need to start to understand how the proton and the electron are linked and how the orbitals, I like the idea that the orbitals depend upon the nuclear structure. Like the whole thing is one big sandwich together. It needs to be thought of in that context, and the structures have to reflect that.
You mentioned something interesting, which is that there's research starting to show that the electron is found in the nucleus. What is that? Who's publishing that research?
It's not published yet.
I see.
I know of it because it's just happened to be a relationship that we talk about these things as well, who we talk to about these things. And they are developing, they're writing a paper now, and they have some experiments there. So it's just a shot across the bow, if you will. Mm-hmm. And within those experiments, they see transmutations. Now, one of the transmutations that we talk about, I already mentioned something to the effect, is fission. But in this case, we are talking about fission of stable heavy elements, at least relatively heavy. Fission of stable elements. So you're talking molybdenum, you're talking tungsten, you're talking, in that range. There is no normal decay happening over there. And these, they split. And within the splitting, they see things happening. And amongst other things, they see nuclear electrons released, etc. But I'm not privy to the exact details here, but I know this is in the works. So this is happening already. And like I said, there's normal mainstream knowledge, like the beta decay steps. There's electron capture and the beta plus and the beta minus. And if you do not have in your model electrons within the nucleus, you have to explain it away. So this is the current understanding. And I would, again, maybe not so humbly, disagree with that and say, actually, well, the electron doesn't disappear. It's not annihilated. It simply takes place within the nucleus. And you can't really reach that nucleus with our current equipment, if you will. First, you have to strip all the electrons around it away and then still do stuff. So I can imagine that's pretty difficult. But
so when we talk about transmutation of elements, we're talking about one element turning into a different element. And we have the accepted mechanism for that is basically radioactive decay, right? So you have a heavy element, it's unstable, fusion. It breaks up. Fusion, but fusion for effective purposes is happening, at fusion reactors for split seconds, and then is also happening in the center of stars. So it's not really something that hypothetically, right?
Somewhere, it's happening somewhere.
Yeah, everybody's fusion. Fusion must be happening. We have a lot of big atoms.
It's got to be happening somewhere. We got a lot of exactly.
That's big.
So when we talk about transmutation, I've seen you talk about transmutation in both directions, fusion and fission. So let's talk about the setup for the fission of not very heavy atoms, which is what you're saying, which is this experiment that you just described. What are the conditions in which you see tungsten fall apart or molybdenum fall apart? What is happening?
Well, if I knew exactly, we would solve a lot of issues today and maybe get a prize on our head, right? Because that's what we're all after. But what is happening, what we see is happening is somehow, some way, with the help of a little bit of electricity, things happen. And we're talking actual transmutations here. Now, there may be a whole set of parameters that have to be okay. You may have to have ions. You may have to have specific elements combined. You may need enough heat. There needs to be the right type of current, etc. Those would all be parameters that you need to look at. But generally speaking, if you look at a cathode and an anode, and you do a little bit your best there, you will see transmutations happening. But
in both directions, or are you talking about transmutations like fusion transmutations or fission transmutations?
And what quantities of transmutations are we talking? Are you like manufacturing vast quantities of gold? Like,
yeah, is this?
No, I think. Now, mind you, this is very difficult to quantize this.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, but right now it's not that much, so it's easy to say, well, that's just contamination that came together a little bit, deposited over there. Now that may happen, but I'm talking about conclusive experiments which show, well, hang on, we have so much chromium over here in that spot, that's more than the whole total amount of contamination of chromium that was there, right? Something to that effect. So these transmutations are really happening. And are
those fusions? Are those transmutations up or down? I think of it as like upshifting or downshifting.
Depends what you do. I'm seeing actually fission happening quite readily. Fission, which is quite astonishing. And I'm talking about when you're playing around with electric forces. Fission seems to be the result. I'm not saying there cannot be fusion happening, but the main thing. If you're playing around with one of the people that we closely are working with, is Florian Stankovic from Switzerland, who gave a presentation at one of the ICCF conferences, the cold fusion conferences. And he shows how you can electrolyze water. Many have done that. And it's called, Brown's gas, I think is one of the terms that they use for that. And if you ignite that and use that on a carbon, you can see transmutations happening. But now you're talking fusion, it seems. So we're not using electricity there. So, but this is one of the things that we would need to find out, right? And I would hope that in an more honest world, I guess, many scientists would jump on this and start doing those types of experiments. At least that's what we're trying to do within the ICCF community.
And you have some, maybe you can speak a little bit about where these processes might be occurring naturally, right? Because there's some, you make some indication that perhaps these really high voltage, like inside of volcanoes, there's these huge lightning storms, and there might be places where elements are actually being made through transmutation.
Oof. Now you're touching on you're scaling up here.
I'm just curious. Yeah, it was an interesting idea.
So what we're seeing is, if you take these experiments in the back of your mind and you accept, just for the fun of it, that transmutations, fission and fusion can both happen under very, very, at least relatively, very mild circumstances. There are quite a few clear indications that life can do it. Well, life, what is life? It's based on water, and water blood is already a plasma, which is a watery environment. So the moment you start talking about water, you can have all kinds of ions floating in there with just a little bit right amount of current. And we are electrical beings in that sense. Who knows, maybe, even organisms can do that. So once you just for the fun of it accept that, and you look around and you look at geology, for example, there are many phenomena that I would argue the elements could very well be created in situ through electric discharges, for example. And in the past, the Earth was probably a lot more violent, or as in the electric universe community likes to point out, the surface of the planetoids are scarred by electric forces. So ion winds and magnetic fields and huge electric discharges and whatnot. And I would argue that a large chunk of our geology is created through that. And if you have those circumstances, I can totally see why you would have in situ creation of gold, if you will, right? Nature did it for us during the catastrophes.
I mean, there is something very organic about the way that veins of minerals are distributed through the crust, and so there's definitely a part of me that agrees that it seems more complex than just this stuff mixed and then separated out inside of a magma chamber, and so that's why you have this vein here and that vein there. And it's like maybe not.
Well, they do use a big, huge electrical containers for these fusion reactions. Like there are some basic fusion reactions that have been demonstrated from what I understand. And they do depend on enormous electrical generators. Like I think to the tune of like several 500 megawatt flywheel systems.
For me, I'm like, okay, so if you think that bacteria are capable of doing this, then you should be able to get bacteria, feed them something, electrify them, and then produce a vein of gold. Right? Or like you should be able to electrify a biofilm.
Small quantities that
maybe, but you should be able to tell that by mass spec or something, right? So it's like the gold standard, and I come from a very empiric tradition, and so you can nudge me off of the empirical the pedestal if you so will, but there is this requirement to theorize something, and the theory is beautiful and good and functional, and it applies even. And then there's the next step of, necessary and sufficient. Is the theorized experiment sufficient to produce the things that we see, or the things that we want to see? And it seems like with room temperature or low energy nuclear reactions, the evidence is kind of is scattered. It's very it's not like there's a gold standard paper that you can point to and say that, they generated continuously these quantities of fission products without having to put in a ton of energy or without getting a ton of energy out. And it just happens naturally, and it's reproducible, and every single lab that tries it has it work, right? Because it's very inconsistent. But at the same time, the DoD has documents where they're looking at low energy nuclear fusion or nuclear reactions. And so there's this incompatibility where on one hand, it's a very, very faint effect that nobody can seem to reproduce. But on the other hand, people really, really fervently believe in it. And so what do you think is the best evidence? What do you think is the absolute closest that people have gotten to reproducibly showing that this happens? Like gold standard, beyond theory, like I can do this every single time, and I can give somebody a protocol and they can do it in their lab and it works. Is there anybody?
Somebody is there, and they may have been, they may not have been. I'm not privy to that information, but the interest in that person would be skyrocketing beyond belief, of course, right? So, but that is, I think, part of the problem here. We all want the solution, but actually getting the solution is a whole nother thing. And then we are stuck, I would argue, and I'm speaking, of course, from my personal point of view here, we are stuck in old thinking. And in this case, I'm calling quantum mechanics old thinking, right? It's not going to help us. If that were going to help us solve these kinds of issues, these topics, they would already have done so. Because allegedly they figured out everything. That's the answer I get. No, we know everything already. That's what people tell me. Well, I think that's quite presumptuous. And if it were helpful enough, we would have done that already. A century of work should be enough. There are definitely experiments that point to transmutations conclusively. But if people are not ready to accept it, you can show everything you want with all the evidence that you want. You will not convince them because they will stick to their paradigm.
What do you think is the gold standard best evidence, though? Like, if you could point to
fusion,
one,
right? Like people have demonstrated fusion.
No, we're not talking. We're talking about low energy nuclear reactions. We're not talking about like fusion with 500 megawatt flywheels. We're talking about low energy stuff. And so I'm asking specifically, like, if somebody wanted, like, I want to read about this, right? What is the most amazingly reputable source for reading about this?
I would point personally, if you're looking specifically into fusion, fission, etc., I would go to the ICCF or the ISCMNS. That is the International, for International Society for Condensed Matter Nuclear Science. So that is a term that you can look for. Or quite easy, ICCF, International Conference for Cold Fusion, I think is the original terminology there. And next week there will be the ICCF 24, which talks all about this. And there will be, maybe, I'm hopeful, some new presentations that will point a little bit into the direction that you so eloquently painted there as a, an actual reproducible thing. But so that is where we want to go ourselves, for example, to do exactly that. So theory is nice, a bit more than theory is nicer, but we need actual relationship to actual practicality, meaning the experiments. It needs to be done, it needs to be reproducible and all that stuff, and under the right circumstances. But the biggest problem in the world is nobody even believes that that could be possible. So
well, and because people have been working on this for decades, and so I think
people.
Yeah, that's true, but it's like, and it's very interesting to me because it seems like there's a handful of people who are working on it. They're getting results that are inconsistent, that are sort of trending towards maybe pointing to the fact that it's possible, but no one's really managed to crack the puzzle. And my question is, why do you think that it is a puzzle, specifically these low energy nuclear reactions? Why do you think that it's a puzzle that's possible?
Can we really quickly, like, I think the idea we're talking about is getting energy back from a fusion reaction, right? Because we can do fusion on Earth with thermonuclear bombs or whatever, and these huge megawatt reactors. But the question is, can you get a self-sustaining reaction that actually gives you back more than you put into it, right? That's this cold fusion idea, right? Just to clarify this terminology in case people aren't aware. I'm a little hazy on it myself.
Well, it's a difficult topic, and definitely. Well, in my mind, I totally agree with you. I'm talking about a COP, a coefficient of, what is it again, performance. I'm talking not 5 or 10. No, you're talking 1,000, 10,000, 100,000. We're talking an enormous amount of energy that you should get back. But again, there is interest from the higher echelons, from governments, from corporations, from institutions, etc. And there are startups, and some make bold claims. Some claim it's done. Some claim they are there. But I don't think we're quite there yet. But if you are there, this is, how did there's a branch of an American government that gave some kind of report, and I forgot exactly what it was, a few years ago. And they talked about this. What if this is true? What if this were actually happening? Well, you're talking earth-shattering things here, right? It's going to have a huge, huge impact on many fields. So what I'm trying to get at is, maybe as humans, are we ready for this? Maybe that's the question here.
And there might be some steps along the way too. Like we might find a use for transmutation that isn't directly generating power for us along the way. Like we had Michael Claridge on the show a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about his work at Sapphire trying to consider the cleanup of radioactive waste by forcing the transmutation of unstable elements into more stable configurations. So I wonder what sort of technologies might appear along the way to harnessing the power, because there's probably more low-hanging fruit that we could technologically engineer. There's sort of solutions we could solve on the way to that big question, perhaps.
How do you figure that the structured atomic model is helpful for the pursuit? Can we call low energy nuclear reactions cold fusion, or is that?
Well, you can debate about that term, and the community is always looking for a better term because cold fusion became so contaminated.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is unfortunate, because of course low energy nuclear reaction is quite apt, I think, right? And so the way we interpret it from the SAM perspective is Low energy input, a lot of energy output, right? So that's why I say benevolent earthly circumstances. Don't put your finger in it, it'll hurt. But, it's not the center of the sun, it's not the surface of the sun, it's not inside a volcano, whatever.
How does the structured atomic model help you reach, how does changing your understanding of what's happening inside of the nucleus to have a geometric structural version of it, how does that get you closer to being able to perform these sorts of low energy nuclear reactions?
I would argue that the structured atom model has done away with so much complexity, so much mathematics. Doesn't mean it's not there, doesn't mean you can't do it. That's not what I'm saying. But you can do away with all that. You can show it in an actual 3D representation. So even children can, high school, when you're exposed to this stuff for the first time, you can look at it and go, okay, that makes sense. You start to get a much, much better and a much simpler perception of this whole stuff, of this whole topic. Now, if I have such simple tools and such simple understanding, now I can start doing something with it without going into the horrible mathematics for years and ages based on point particles, which I don't think work out too well, for starters. So this is a very different world, right? So I think just because of that, this is useful.
It lowers the barrier to entry for thinking about it. You're basically like, you don't have to spend 3 decades studying the most esoteric mathematics in the world. I'm going to give you a framework for being able to think about it and to intuitively understand why these things behave the way that they do without a single piece of math. But technically the math goes into the geometrical arrangement, I guess.
But can you imagine if you were trying to assemble a circuit board and all you had was a bunch of equations versus
exactly.
a wiring diagram, right? Which would be a lot more useful. Because you're like, oh, okay, this is connected to this, and it makes a lot of sense. I think the material models of the atom are just gonna absolutely unlock our technological potential.
So with the structured atomic model, how could you use it to explain what's happening during fusion? Let's start with hot fusion, right? So you start with something that is small and you get something that is big, and you've had to apply a tremendous amount of temperature and pressure. And so what do you think is actually happening to the constituents, the nuclear constituents that come together during a fusion reaction? Because you've talked about the fact that inside of the atom, the forces are electromagnetic and electrostatic. And so what is it that about temperature and pressure that causes two nuclei to fuse?
Well, that is an assumption that we need those circumstances, right, to mimic the inside of a star, so we can get hot fusion. That is what we base it on. Now, what if that is actually wrong? That would be a bummer.
Well, it's hard to imagine, if you're trying to make something big, if you're trying to take two small things and smash them and make something bigger out of them, even just two pieces of clay, that's the most physical thing I can think of. You do gotta cram them together. I just don't what else? What other possibility is there?
I mean,
you gotta pressure them together. Right?
There's okay. So
yes, but that's a forced way of doing it. Again, coming from a certain way of thinking about this, right? So meaning that's how stars work, that's how the elements were created, and that's how we should reproduce it. Now, what if this can be done by making them do it themselves? Meaning,
say more about that.
I create the circumstances where they pull each other in. Now, whether that's through electric fields or whatever, or ions, but if we can do that, then it would be a very different ballgame. And I have good reason to say that, because there are, I will give you another experiment, which has to do with fusion. And I believe it was a gentleman from Japan, Osaba, and he and colleagues probably had a small chamber wherein they ionized a little bit of sodium, so Na23. They ionized it. And they had that in this little closed chamber, and they ionized it with an electric arc. And then they injected the molar equivalent, so meaning, nicely the other part that you need for the reaction of oxygen into it. And the way they were looking at it through spectroscopy, and they were seeing, clearly the lines of sodium, for example. The moment they gave that oxygen shot into the chamber, what was it? Orange line, I think, of sodium. Sodium is orange, I think. Changed into a much more purple violet, I think, line of potassium. Pretty much instantly. So this is not a forced mechanism. This is
like catalyzed, right?
To do it automatically. It wants to do it if you have the proper circumstances.
And this is the basic principle of catalysis, right? And we see this in nature and chemistry and biology all of the time where, it's easier for me to think about it in biology or chemistry just because you have circumstances like you have some sort of environment, which is the catalyst that holds onto the two molecules and basically puts them close to each other so they don't have to smash into each other at extreme temperatures or, you basically speed things up by making it easier for the elements to recombine. And so I imagine something similar as a fusion solution.
So I didn't totally understand the experimental design. So you have sodium and it's inside of an electric field?
No, it's inside of a small metal chamber where they put a sodium sample inside and then they ionized it with an electric arc. So they ionized the sodium. So you had only the sodium ions within that closed environment.
And so when you ionize the sodium environments, in the absence of oxygen, they give the sodium line. And when you add oxygen, they give the potassium line.
Like that. Now,
that's wild. Whose research is this?
Yeah, we gotta read about this. This is freaking crazy.
Osawa, meaning Oshawa, I think, but you have to play around with the spelling maybe. But I'll look it up later on. I think I have links somewhere. But this is one of the experiments that for me personally was very convincing. Not just this one, but there are other experiments. There are other papers. And if you put them together, you get a different picture. Again, you have to be ready to accept it, right? Again, if you stick to, the elements were created in colliding neutron stars, I cannot convince you. If you are ready to look at it, even momentarily, from a completely different perspective, you get a very different view of things. And personally, I think that's the way to go.
Right. I think that's a very, I think that is one of the most difficult things about doing science, which is that the effects that are widely theorized and widely believed in will have much more time and energy put into them than something that is inconsistent or has been hard to show or has only piecemeal evidence. And the problem also here is the fact that if somebody actually does manage to prove that low energy nuclear reactions are possible, you're right that there's going to be a huge prize. There's going to be there's a tremendous amount of pressure to falsify this data. Would you?
Yeah, and because it's such a big prize at the end of the rainbow here, most people don't want to talk about the stuff that they find out. So sharing information, very low also, right? Even in the field.
Yeah, it's really cagey. People really don't want to talk about their experimental design. They don't want to talk about what it is that they're finding. They don't want to talk about specifics. And as a scientist, that's weird for me because I've never spoken, I'm a microbiologist by trade. You never talk to somebody who's studying biofilms and they're like, no, my recipe for my agar is secret. Right?
They kind of do, though, a little bit.
No, they
There's
don't.
a little bit of that.
No,
I encountered it a little
don't.
bit. I worked in places where people will have protocols, and you'll go to other labs, and you'll be like, how do you do this? And they'll kind of tell you, like, their methods are kind of, like, they don't really want you to be able to redo it. I get that sense sometimes. There is some competitive stuff like that. But I think you're right, Dr. Benterbury. I think that what you're getting at is that technology has a very different set of goals than science, which is just trying to understand nature.
Yeah, like science, like if this was, the Royal Institute of Low Energy Nuclear Fusion, like we'd be writing letters to each other and be like, "Dearest Edo, I have discovered through experimentation." And it's weird sitting on the outside and looking in, because I'm like, I genuinely want to assess the quality of this work, but no one is willing to talk about it. And I'm like, how can I assess if your scientific ideas are robust if you won't even tell me what your experiment looks like? If you won't even tell me what you find? If you won't tell me how you controlled it? If you won't tell
Well,
me.
they'll think in 2 years I will have it done, and then we can maybe talk about it a little bit more. But you, the reality of the world does catch up with you. The moment you start doing this work, you're talking about organization, people, specialists, money, interest, the promise after. That's going to have to be guarded. So there's going to be all kinds of people that get involved. And before you know it, you're not allowed to say a thing no more. And there you
Yeah.
go. As a scientist, I agree with you. I would prefer this would already have been out there. Well, maybe not, because it wouldn't be so fun. But well, now we can do it, right? But I mean, this is the fun. This is the fun, because of course, we are not in agreement with current mainstream perception, right? The quantum mechanic realm. We're not saying it's all wrong. We're not saying they're evil or anything, but we are saying it doesn't bring us anything. And we are saying that doing it in a different way, we can start figuring out stuff that is beyond our wildest dreams, like doing cold fusion and like figuring that out, doing new science. So that's the realm we live in, and we are having great fun. Well, others try to tell us, that's wrong, that can't be, and well,
Yeah, where does the funding for a lot of this research come from? When it comes to with the big particle accelerators, it's very much international governments are coming together and they're building progressively more and more expensive colliders.
yeah.
And when it comes to the low energy stuff, who's is it individual private donors that believe in it and are giving money to it? Is it companies? Like what's the funding structure like?
I'm not entirely sure, but the impression that I got from talking to all kinds of people throughout the past few years is that most experiments are literally shoestring budget in the back room or in the garage. Then you have the projects that are a little bit elevated, sometimes done within university or corporations, but particularly corporations are very hush-hush about it. And there are a couple of think more privately funded, bigger experiments going on around there in the world. So there are several of those. I think you have I mentioned already Sapphire. They have a budget of at least millions, but it all is completely nothing if you compare it to all the bigger projects and the particle accelerators and the ITER in south of France and comparable thing in Britain, and I'm sure other countries have something too.
Like, yeah, there's the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory has been working on the National Ignition Facility for a really, really long time. Since probably like 90s. And I don't think that they've ever gotten any kind of sustained output from them.
You'll see that one on the front page of the New York Times.
Yeah. So that kind of leaves us in a position where it's like it's a field that's very interesting because it has huge promise. It's very, very difficult to get a sense for what's actually happening because nobody wants to talk about it because it's so like are people worried that their designs are going to get stolen, their ideas are going to get stolen, that somebody's going to beat them to the punch?
I was going to say, it actually seems like technology would be like the least interesting data to fabricate because your product has to work at the end of the day. Like, it doesn't matter if you lie and say you can do fusion. If you can, then you're going to get rich. If you can't, you're not going to get anything. Like, I just don't know how you can fake it with technology, It's like it either works or it doesn't.
I think that this reminds me of, I don't know if you followed Theranos here in the United States. So there was a company who was helmed by this woman named Elizabeth Holmes, and she wanted to revolutionize blood testing. And so what she did is she was like, I'm going to build a machine that from one drop of blood, a single finger stick on the pad of your finger will allow us to test for dozens, if not hundreds, of metabolites and levels and things like that. And the problem is that she lied for many years about whether or not her prototypes were working. She would have these machines, she would show them to investors, and then when it was time to actually run the tests, they would take regular amounts of blood samples and they would send them to an out of site laboratory that would do all the testing, bring it back, and they would pretend like the testing came from the machines. And eventually she was caught, right? So there's a bunch of, it's everybody, it's Schadenfreude to the extreme. Everybody loves watching
It's a little tragic because like she was on the road to making it happen, and there's a lot of evidence that guys like Edison were doing the exact same thing. Like they didn't actually have what they were telling their investors they had, but they believed, and she believed that she was going to pull it off in the next few months. And if she just had a little more time and a little more money, she could make it happen. And maybe she could have. But it wasn't working.
But what I'm saying is that there is an incentive to lie about technology, and people can lie for a long time.
To get more investments, for
sure.
Exactly. But at some point, the product's got to be...
Yeah, but by that point, you're like in the Caymans.
I don't think that was her deal. I don't think she wanted to be in the Caymans. I think she really wanted to see it through.
Yeah, that's probably true.
And she just couldn't pull it off.
So I don't want to name names within the other fields that I'm a little bit involved in, but there are a few of those there too that I personally look at like, this is just fake it till you make it, and not even that. It's straight up lying sometimes. Right? I'm not pointing fingers to anybody here that know me or anything else, but they are around, and every field will have a few of those, I imagine, right?
And do you get the sense that everybody in the field kind of agrees who those people are? Or do you think that is there wildly inconsistent opinions about whether or not somebody's data is good?
Well, there's one particular case that indeed I think everybody is mostly in agreement that you better not deal with that person. Yeah. So kind of like your example, it's, no, it's not real. It's just fake. But that does tremendous damage to that field, I would say. Absolutely. Especially in the cold fusion field. It already has such a bad rep, right? And then comes along somebody like that, and it will be utterly destructive. And for the next 10 years, you can see the little bit of dropping in investment that was made drops even further, right?
Yeah, I wonder if that's played out in the Theranos case. Like if other people who were working on sort of similar ideas are having difficulty getting funding now because Elizabeth Holmes like ruined it for everybody, kind of thing.
I mean, it seems entirely possible.
It's an interesting moment in our society because we don't really have like any kind of moral police when it comes to science necessarily. Like we like figure out how to do these amazing things, or we figure out how the atom works, or we figure out how bacteria and viruses and all these things work, but we don't actually get together and think about like, okay, now that we know this, how should we behave necessarily? It's not really like a guiding unified, there's no place to sit around and have these moral discussions in a way that's binding.
And there seems like, especially with cold fusion, there is a huge moral conundrum because it removes scarcity. And we live in a world where scarcity, I think, is an important motivator, where you're going to run out, you have to conserve, you cannot live as if, the energy landscape is infinite and without limit. You have to live as if you'll always only be able to take a little bit of it. And I think that also plays into our moral structures.
Some of the biggest markets are energy markets, let's be honest. And so what happens if those markets collapse? Well, it's going to be bad news for certainly some big barons, but also probably just for the economy as a whole. It's quite a shock to imagine, okay, now we don't have, transportation costs are a huge part of the cost of goods.
Everything costs, like heating costs, the cost of being able to cook your food. These are the costs.
Right?
This is the fundamental limit of our society, right? Is energy. Oh, the things that we could build if energy was limitless.
That is why I refer to that. And again, I can't remember, but it was a federal institute of something in the United States that did that research into the cold fusion phenomenon. And they concluded, if this is real, and they didn't think the technology was there yet, but they did see the progress. And if it became real, it would be, you know, earth-shattering. It's an absolutely society-changing thing here. So it's not nothing. And energy, you're right. Energy is important. Just look around us in the news today, right? How many problems do we have around that topic?
Well, the economy is pegged to it, as far as I understand, at least like for the
Like the cost of oil.
yeah. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
and like what I think earth shattering is an understatement. Like I think it would be economy shattering, and it would destroy different businessmen's portfolio. Like there's a lot of reasons for not wanting it to happen if you're sitting on top of some energy market. I mean, I'm not even trying to be conspiratorial. I just it just occurs to me that
It's normal, right? People have other interests. So another energy market wouldn't be happy with this. Of course not. It will destroy their market. But that's, you know, changing times, progress, whatever.
yeah, it's hard
Yeah.
to keep something hidden away once it's figured out, especially if some guy's able to do it in his garage or something.
Yeah,
It's
like that's the thing. Like the dream of low energy nuclear reactions is the idea that you could in your garage be doing this. And it's also, so to me it seems if it's really possible and it's possible to scale it, it also kind of solves the the question of it literally is access to a post scarcity world, not just in terms of energy, but if you can assemble molecules, if you can make heavy atoms out of lighter ones, you will never run out of any resource ever again.
In theory, of course not. I don't know how much effort it will cost, but if it's relatively low effort, then, you know, you could make any kind of metal or isotope that you would want. Yeah.
well, if you can get unlimited electrical power out of a fusion reactor, and it almost doesn't matter like how much energy it requires at that point.
Yeah, right?
So this is something that I'd like to point out to people when I talk to them, like you guys now, is that step away from that old thinking. Go to that new thinking. Open your mind. I mean, we all talk about that, you know, waking up, opening your mind, being broad-minded, open-minded, etc. But if you really, really do that, and you step into that new paradigm that is coming up, if you go there, then you will find out there is so much research to be done still. It's amazing how much, because when I grew up, when I went to school and I started to study in science, you know, what do you learn? You learn everything how it is, and it's already being done. I don't have to think about how the stars were created because somebody already did that, right? So I don't have to do that. Well, that's not fun. And I mean, there are many people that walked away from science because it's no fun. There is no fun anymore in science. And even if you have something fun and you want to talk about it, you get shut down, you get censored, you get called crazy, whatever. There's no honest debate in that sense. But once you do, you will find out that all that work that they claim is already solved. From my perspective, no, most has not been solved. So people, please listen, look at this stuff, go into it, and you will find out there is a whole career to be made for all those young scientists to do that wonderful work and make those discoveries, because we haven't figured it all out by a long shot. At least that's my personal opinion again, but
Yeah, that's a point we hit on the show all the time. And we both like had this experience coming up through school too, where it was like, oh, scientists already figured out everything. Basically, like if you want to go work on some details, like go for it. You can maybe compete with 1,000 other people for a professorship, and you can hammer out the details of some tiny minutia. But we as a society have a really hard time revisiting fundamental paradigms that could affect all of the downstream theories after it. Like revisiting old ideas, I think is like one of the most valuable things you can do in science. It's like, well, where did we get this idea of an electron? Like, why do we think that? And it might not be what you would expect, right? I mean, it was certainly shocking to me when I started reading the old manuscripts and understanding where people came up with these basic ideas that we just turned into assumptions and built them into the future theories, right? And so I wish there was a place in the pipeline of education for people to examine fundamental principles in a novel way and really reinterpret old ideas or old experiments and
I think that's what the world of hobbyists is about, is the world of people who have, the science curious. They've grown up doing science and they studied it perhaps even, but then when they became adults, they did something different and they still read about it and they still think about it and they spend their time on the forums and talking to people and figuring things out and seeing what doesn't make sense. Because we live in a world where we know a tremendous amount about how stuff works, and education is viewed as the process of cramming that into people's brains. Of just like, by the time that you're done with education, you're going to have a collection of pieces of information about the basic building blocks and how they work. And if you really want to be able to say that you know something, you're going to have to go to college. And if you really want to say that you know something, you're going to have to get a graduate degree in that field in order to be able to like push the limits, right? And everything is structured that you do it inside of the academy. If you're doing it outside of the academy, you're not a real scientist. You're just, who knows, you're just some schlub with ideas. But I think that that's really disingenuous because inside of the academy, it's mostly focused on engineering. There's some basic science that's still left. That's definitely true.
Not much, no.
Not much, but I mean, there's institutions which are just about basic science.
It's almost impossible to write a grant like, we just want to understand how this thing works, just to understand it. It's like you always have to tie it back to
That's
like,
absolutely true.
what's this going to do for the people, the government, the state, the military, whatever.
And you talk to people that are investigators that are running laboratories, and it's this thing of just like, well, we have to write it this way, and maybe we can start a different project that's kind of in the background that allows us to explore and to think and to dream. And
Yeah.
every scientist has that part of themselves, that heart of curiosity, and that heart breaks over the course of a career in the academic sciences because you are just part of a machine that is meant to produce more knowledge that fits what comes before it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like it's like a self-assembling microtubule, right? There's a machine and you're part of it, and your job is to just keep adding little bits to the end of the tube. And at some point the tube will end and maybe you'll start a different tube.
Well, if it doesn't end, we start talking about, maybe it's a little bit facetious, but then we end up talking about multiverses and black holes and that kind of stuff. So the imagination starts running wild. That's the building on top of the tube, because that's the only thing that's left, right? The wild imagination.
Yeah,
As opposed to going back and like reinvestigating where the tube came from in the first place.
Yeah, well, this is something that I noticed in your paper where you were like, the structured atomic model allows us to rethink a lot of these kind of kooky big science ideas like the Big Bang and black holes and all this stuff. How so?
Well, first of all, if you understand that a neutron is not that fundamental, a neutron star comes into question. And certain heavy elements are allegedly only created in an explosion or colliding neutron star. I'm not sure which one it was. Maybe there are two versions there. And then all that stuff is blown away like gold, which is a pretty heavy element, and lead. And then it's somehow, we find it on the outer shell of this Earth in concentrated form here and there. That breaks logic. And that is the way most people think all the elements came into being. But if you start to understand that this is not the way it went, and you look at the way we propose it should go, then you start to understand that fusion and fission are quite normal things that happen all over the place. So you get a very different evolving cosmos already. Stars they function in a different way than we think. One of the main misconceptions in mainstream that's the argument they always throw out. Elements are created up to iron with a yield of energy. So that is a reaction that occurs under the right circumstances, pressure, temperature inside stars. Then the heavier elements, they say, cannot be made with fusion, but only by rapid neutron capture, meaning you need an exploding neutron star with all those neutrons overloading an iron atom, which then decays into a nickel and then to something a little bit heavier, a little bit heavier, a little bit heavier, all the way up to uranium. Now that doesn't make sense. And by the way, it doesn't work. in many steps. So, but that's another story. But so that is the way the elements are created in their mind. But if you understand that the elements can actually be put together, meaning an iron, sodium, for example, we talked about, with an oxygen, or an iron with an oxygen, that still works. And there is no problem there with the amount of energy that it is an endothermic reaction suddenly. No, an oxygen and an iron is still very much yielding energy. So why can they not produce heavier elements by fusing the already lighter elements with the little bit less lighter element, like an iron and an oxygen?
Do you think that something as big as uranium could be naturally occurring on
how?
Earth?
I think uranium is created predominantly in situ here on Earth.
Whoa.
By a process of fusion under the right circumstances, and we're
Like
not there
lightning
yet.
bolts and stuff, or something like that.
Something like that. Well, I talked about the other experiment with electrolyzed water, right? Brown's gas, and there's another term there that I forgot.
Oh man, I love that idea because it helps me make sense of the 4.5 billion year asymptote with radiometric dating. You know, if you look at this is kind of a rabbit hole, but if you look at the history of the planet, you know, we've been moving the timeline back for how old everything is pretty much steadily for the last 200 years or so. You know, everything keeps getting older and older, and everything from humanity's appearance to the appearance of life and everything else. And if what's occurred to me is very strange, and I'm sorry, folks, I always bring this up, but it's so fascinating, is we are always told that the solar system is 4.5 billion years old because all we ever find in meteors is things that are 4.5 billion years old. We've never dated anything older than 4.5 billion years with this radiometric dating. But what's really strange is there are interstellar meteors now that are impinging on the Earth, and several of them in the last decade. I think 3 actually. And that sort of implies that there have always been interstellar meteors impinging on the Earth. I'm assuming it didn't just start happening. And so why are all of the meteors from long ago only dating to this 4.5 billion years? And it makes me think that
You'd expect there to be a lot fewer interstellar objects than... I mean, it's entirely possible that you're just not finding the objects.
It's
right?
possible. I just think that the 4.5 thing it really seems like an asymptote where, of course, if you actually have a process where you're creating new uranium de novo, the assumption in this dating process is that all of the uranium that is there was there since the beginning. There's no way for new uranium to appear in the system. If new uranium appears in the system, it's lights out for that dating method.
But
it was the exploding neutron star, and then our solar system was formed. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm always curious, like, for new novel mechanisms by which uranium could appear. We had this gentleman, Marvin Herndon, on the show, who talked about how some uranium in his model of the Earth's core could be bound up chemically and be released such that new uranium was appearing on the surface and stuff. I'm fascinated.
If lightning strikes are sufficient to produce new uranium, though, shouldn't you be able to go to where a lightning strike happens and then just Geiger counter it? Like, shouldn't you be able to detect the presence of...
Well, it's fascinating because there's tons of uranium in granite, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. How did it get there?
How did it get there? And like, why is it in these really tall places?
Well, like, let me say this. That, like, I've been reading a ton of geology papers recently, and like old geology papers, like 60s and 70s, and they're loony. Like the model of the Earth's formation is that the Earth formed as a molten ball of stuff. And it had no atmosphere when it formed. It was just a bare rocky ball. It had no core. And when the gravitational heating was sufficient that there was like one convection cell moved through the heart of the Earth and separated all of the elements out to their relative fraction density. And that's how we have a core, and that's the organization of the Earth. And they're basically like, we just have this...
And then a bunch of comets hit us and we got water.
And that's why we have so much lead and tungsten and gold sitting in veins on the outermost part of our Earth. Right.
And so, I mean, there's definitely crazy things in the way that we understand things, but I've noticed in those papers where they're like, there's no way that radioactivity is coming from inside the Earth. They're like, in the last 5-10 years, they've started to change their minds about that. They're starting to basically say that, maybe the mantle is radioactive. Maybe the core is radioactive. Maybe there's a geothermal reactor that's down there. And things are starting to shift towards maybe it is, because I've been trying to figure out, what
Well,
is down there. And it seems like
well,
we have no idea, honestly.
well, I would agree with that we have almost no idea. But a molten core creating Earth's magnetic surrounding, that is a no-go. Molten
Why?
iron is not magnetic. That's one. So there's a problem there already.
The core is solid.
Yeah.
The very core of the Earth is a solid dynamo.
Yeah.
Under
But
the current
Under
model.
the current model. Yeah. So I just want to, I want to give credit where
I'm not
credit
an
is due.
engineer, but you're telling me it's a no-go, right? But if you look at the Earth, it's pretty much a metal ball, right? And the outer crust is the oxidized metal. That's the crust. That's rocky material. A metal oxide, usually something. Silicon oxide, calcium oxide, iron oxide, doesn't really matter.
They call it sial. So like they differentiate the crust from what's directly underneath it because it's silicon aluminum, and then underneath the upper mantle is mostly silicon magnesium.
Those are assumptions because
The-
the deeper we go, one of the deepest boreholes, I think, was predominantly silicon oxide material, lots of water, boiling with hydrogen, and quite a bit of magnesium, I think it was. That's about it. But that's not the picture that we're painting about mantles. By the way, we don't know what the mantle is made of. I mean, we don't see mantle material. Sometimes we say it's mantle material that came to the surface, but that's simply an assumption. Magma doesn't come from the mantle, not even in the mainstream models. It's just heat, and it's transferred that heat, and then you get magma creation, and it comes up. It's not mantle material. At least that's what I'm being told by geologists. But what if the water goes down into the crust, reaches a hot zone, and there are electric currents there? They call them telluric currents. Now you have water with hydrogen and oxygen. You have a metal, and you have electric current. You have heat. You have pressure. Maybe, just maybe, and now I know many people call this speculating, but maybe that is a recipe for creating, at a certain rate, nuclear transmutation reactions, whether it's fusion or fission. Maybe that is a mechanism for creating magma even. I'm not saying this must be per se, right? But this is expanding this thinking. Maybe this is the way it works. Maybe the Earth is also using these types of reactions to create all kinds of metals and elements. How else would they come up on the exterior surface of this planet? So much, like uranium. It's pretty abundant.
Hmm.
It seems like you could do some back of the envelope calculations or even some in-depth calculations to at least test whether the energies are sufficient, or like what size of currents would be necessary and how that would happen. And
Well, you'd have to be able to first show that it happens in the laboratory, right? Like, this is the problem.
On some small scale,
On some
perhaps,
small
yeah. But we're
scale.
talking about huge geological forces and massive currents, and yeah.
And when you start to get bigger, I have a very prosaic understanding of this, but as you start to change scales, things don't just scale by the amount that you've changed the scale, right? Like, if you're cooking something, right? I was making like an herbal infusion. And normally I have a little bit of herbs that I infuse in a little bit of oil. And there's a certain amount of time dynamics and a certain amount of energy that you have to put into that vessel in order to get it to infuse. But then a friend of mine brought over, I don't know, probably like a 30-pound sack of herbs. And so I made a huge dose of it, and it's a completely different, the dynamics of infusion, the dynamics of heat transfer, the dynamics of how this thing that's maybe like 50 times bigger works versus the little vessel is completely different. And so I think that anything that you show on a small scale inside the laboratory is conceptually going to be different when it's
I
happening
really
on a
like the
planetary
idea that
scale.
you had about going out into the world and looking for new, like the appearance of radioactive elements or new nuclei after at these strike sites, like around volcanoes and things like. I think that's a promising lead, because you should expect to see. I feel like you could design some sort of assay where you could look before and after and find whether these things are happening.
I think
It's just such
magma's
an exciting
radioactive.
idea. I mean, these freaking lightning bolts they see out of these volcanoes are just massive. There must be huge currents being arced in these scenarios.
Well, so just a comment about the geology. My understanding comes very much from a developing branch, I would argue, which is the electric universe geology. So the electric universe poses that the electric forces in our cosmos are the predominant force. They're not ignoring or saying it's not real gravity. It's there, it's a real thing, but not the predominant force that creates stuff. Electricity does. And if you look at the the surface of the Earth or Mars or the Moon, it seems to be an electric created surface, right? It's not erosion by water, it's not wind, etc. It's not even meteor impacts on the Moon with all these creators, because they are too circular. And they always have a new crater in the rim of that first creator. And those are all electric effects. If you look at the branching on Earth, if you use a Google Earth and you go to a place like a Mongolia or whatever, you see huge electric electric discharges, EDM, electric discharge machining, I think it is, right? But then on the surface on the Earth on a much larger scale. So I'm personally living in the conviction nowadays, slowly but surely, that, electric force is created. But that would have been under cataclysmic circumstances, right? Not the odd volcano going off nowadays, but in the past, hundreds of volcanoes went off simultaneously, huge disasters, the Atlantis story, if you will. So under those circumstances, I can see, a lot of these things being created, including veins and breccia pipes and whatnot.
It's funny because some people would be like, well, where's the evidence for all this electrical stuff? And you're like, well, it's right here. And they're like, and it's funny how like evidence can tell multiple stories, right? Like you just walk up on the scene of a crime and there's like a body and like a gun on one side of the room. And you can come up with all these different stories for like what the evidence means happened, right? And people are so obsessed in this world. They're like, well, you need evidence-based science. And it's like, well, the gun and the body aren't going to tell you what happened. Like you still have to come up with a story to link the gun to the body and so forth. And there's often multiple stories you can tell for that.
Well, I think that it, at least in part, is due to the fact that we live in a world where electricity is pretty contained, right? I mean, so if you go into the electric universe and you start to read about, let's say, the Valles Marineris, huge feature on Mars, very much, it's supposed to be a rift valley, but you look at it and it looks very much like it was scraped and carved out of the landscape, not in the sense, like if you look at Africa's Rift Valley, it looks very different from the Valles Marineris. In the electric universe, it's basically a galactic arcing event, right? Something comes by that's conductive, it arcs to the surface of the planet, that carves out the Valles, it leaves, and now you have the scar. And so you have one thing, which is the evidence, which is the scar. And then you have the other thing, which is the evidence, which is we've never seen an electrical discharge event of this magnitude. And so there is what I think is a relatively reasonable reluctance to jump to mechanism that has never been observed, right? So it's like the minute that you start to look into the electric universe, I think that the biggest problem is the fact that, hey, the electrical phenomena that we see are on a much smaller scale than what seems possible to carve the side of Mars into hamburger. And how do we reconstruct a story that's possible given the
without like biblical scale catastrophes, essentially?
Yeah.
We haven't seen running water on Mars or another planet either, so that's the same argument, right?
Yeah.
We haven't
Good
seen
point.
those
Yeah.
electric phenomena, but the other.
But we have seen running water on planets, period. So we look at Earth and we're like, where water runs here, it's probably run on Mars. If we
So
were
what
having
do is
enormous electrical catastrophe, we'd probably be like, oh, electrical catastrophe here, electrical catastrophe on Mars, no problem.
maybe the sun needs to give a really big burp in order to give these circumstances, right? That is one of the things, the huge solar flare and X
Yeah.
flare, whatever category. And maybe every now and then it makes an even bigger burp. But maybe the electric universe is right, and all the stars are connected through pathways, if you will, of very thin ionized gas in space, right? Space is not
Circuits.
entirely empty. Yeah, so you get, the Birkeland currents connection where energy is actually running. Now, if that isn't circuitry and it gets a jolt, if you will, of electric current, and it goes through us being relatively small in that bigger scale, then I can see, stars going haywire, Earth having huge telluric currents running, because if you the plasma surrounding us, if you hit that with the solar flare and you make it a lot more negative or a lot more positive, I'm not sure which way it would go, but the currents start running to the other side of Earth to balance out. And if you make that big enough, right, it doesn't have to be a current that's coming from Mars towards Earth or from the sun to Earth. No, it needs to be a plasma cloud strong enough with charge enough to perturbate, I think is the term here, the Earth system itself, which then will have all kinds of discharges in certain locations around the North Pole, where we now have the Northern Lights, for example. So maybe they will pierce through them. Look, that is where we start to speculate, because nobody really knows.
It'd be really cool if we could start looking out, like if there were amateur astronomers who could look out into the night sky, especially as the telescopes get better and better, and be able to see some of these processes maybe happening. Like, can you see a massive electrical storm shaping the surface of a planet somewhere out in the cosmos?
I would say almost. I mean, I
Not
can't.
Not right now.
Yeah.
I mean, the telescopes can barely see whether there's planets there or not, but
Right.
it's conceivable.
I mean, I think that this touches a little bit on the Fermi paradox, because I think that a civilization that encounters that strong of an electrical event probably doesn't survive.
Well,
It doesn't survive in a way where knowledge is intact.
Well, you could see it on the next planet over or something, maybe.
right.
But yeah, if it's a global solar system-wide thing, yeah, we're screwed.
Yeah.
If you look at the North American continent, for example, that allegedly about, 11,000 years ago, it was pretty much wiped out of any big mammal, right? Including humans.
Oh, wait, sorry, when? What time period?
She was talking about the Ice Age and like the megafauna extinction and stuff.
The megafauna extinction, exactly. So the whole continent was wiped out of bigger animals. Could that not have been a huge catastrophe caused by something like that?
Well, I
So
think
what
that
I'm
there's a
saying-
pretty good line of evidence that the Younger Dryas extinction was caused by some kind of impact event. Yeah. Like,
Right, but I would like to offer, instead of always saying, "Oh, it was a really big rock that fell down," right? I don't think so. I think something else happened. We can totally argue about what happened, and again, it's not that I'm privy to what happened, but from this perspective, I think those electric occurrences, those catastrophic occurrences, they are devastating, and they will wipe out 99% of bigger life on a whole continent. But it may be that the other side of the planet is relatively safe. They only get a huge wave or something instead of only also volcanoes, etc.
I didn't realize. So it was the late Pleistocene extinction only in North America?
No, but I think that was hit the most severe. So Africa was.
I mean, that's where the ice sheet was for sure.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
have a really great episode coming out next week about the ice sheet and like true polar wonder, and we're always looking for mechanisms that could cause these things to happen. And I think that you're exactly right that in general when people talk about, solar system catastrophe, they talk about physical impacts. And I think that that's because those have the best evidence left behind.
Yeah, we can see them happening all the time.
Yeah. Again, it's uniformitarianism. It's like if we can't see something happening, then we can't invoke it as a force to shape the universe because it literally defies belief in these like relatively conservative institutional structures. They're like, we can't go out on a limb and say that it was electricity because we haven't seen that happen. And if we can start to see it happen, like you're saying, that's what pushes it into being acceptable. And I think that the electric universe has done a tremendous amount of work to point out that galactic and larger structures appear to be electrical in nature and that we can see it. We're just not paying enough attention to it.
Well, we come from a time that, we explored the whole Earth not too long ago. And we started making sense of mountains and layers and canyons and all that stuff and continents because we found out there were continents. And the only thing we had, of course, were volcanoes and erosion and sedimentation. So we map everything on that understanding. But now we have clear, detailed imagery, thanks to satellites and probes, of the surface of other planets. So, including ours, by the way, not that long ago, right? And if you look at the surface area and you compare that to an electric SCART or an electric discharge machine surface of a metal, it's 1-on-1, just much bigger. So, and now we start to learn much more. So I would say this is just evolving, we're developing, and we are expanding our awareness and thinking. And we don't have to call everything done by a volcano or sedimentation or water erosion, just like the Grand Canyon. It doesn't look like water erosion to me, to be honest. And I'm from a water country, we do a little bit in that. If you look at the satellite imagery, the rivers, the rivers do erode and they do sedimentation, right? Don't get me wrong here. Those processes are real. But what we're saying is the bigger shapes were created by the electric forces because that's what they look like. Granted, we haven't seen that before. But there's a lot of evidence that humanity has seen it before, but most were not able to tell it. And yeah, we lost pretty much all knowledge and maybe had to restart all over again. But that's a whole different ballgame that I will not touch any further than that.
I think that's the difficulty with studying geology and making hypotheses about these long-term processes. It's like we've been around for a blink of an eye. And so how the heck do we know? We want to say that everything's just going to be as it is today, tomorrow. But, there's unfortunately, it seems like that's maybe not a reasonable conclusion.
Like if something happens once every 10,000 years.
Should we worry about it?
Well, A, probably yes, but B, we would have absolutely no evidence. We would have no evidence for it because it basically predates, you'd have something written in ancient texts, but everybody would be like, oh, look at their quaint myths.
I'd say people don't want to worry about it.
So
right?
what is the biggest rock we ever found that fell from the sky?
That's a great question.
I think there's a huge meteor in China somewhere. I can't remember the name of it.
What is it? Big as a house or a flat?
I think it's like a field, right? It broke up when it hit the
Hoba meteor. The largest meteorite on Earth is called Hoba. It is located in Namibia and has never been moved. It is 6.5 square meters.
Well, they break up like crazy when they hit the Earth, right?
Yeah,
yeah.
But you need 6.5 kilometers to destroy a huge chunk of the Earth. I've never seen that before. I mean, the difference in scale here that we use, it's extrapolation too. I mean, rocks do fall from the sky, but they're tiny stones.
Yes.
We have never seen a real big impact except for, what was it, Schumacher-Levy, I think, what was it called? In that hit Jupiter, I think it was.
That was pretty cool, yeah. I mean, there's like the Tunguska event too, and
which
some other
we've seen something, but we don't know what it was, right?
Right.
There is. I was just reading about this huge meteor field in China, which was supposed to be one of the biggest fields. I mean, these things obviously, when they hit the atmosphere, they just vaporize everything, and they have to infer, like even the dinosaur ending impact theory is inferred from these little techites, these little glass beads that get made from the impact. There's nothing left of the actual meteor itself.
And there's the iridium boundary too.
A lot of that evidence, like those little glass beads or nano diamonds or certain isotopic ratios for that matter, they are all created in those electric circumstances that we find out now. So
that's right.
We say that is all caused by the impact, but which we started out this talk with, or at least at some point, is those experiments point out, the similar thing. So again, the electric forces and what it does, combined with heat effects and ion winds and pressures and yada, 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 chemical sorting, of course, all that will happen. Suddenly, that whole story about geology, including the evidence in the past, makes a lot of sense. But maybe it was a discharge instead of a big stone. And then people start fighting about it was a stone, it was a discharge. And I go, well, let's just figure it out without that preference up front, right?
I mean,
a little bit of both, maybe.
A little bit of both. Like, I think that there is a really, really, really perplexing reluctance to consider the importance of electricity. Like, I think that fundamentally that is something that I see all of the time, where when we talk about cosmological things, electricity is this second or third order force as opposed to being something that is primary along with gravity.
It seems like somebody should be out there in the field, maybe like some young, ambitious person listening to this podcast who loves the electric universe. There seems like there's ample field work to be done in terms of collecting evidence for what crazy physical processes can result from the very limited electrical arcing that we have on Earth.
We need funding. Not me, but people that do this need funding. You need to live. If you want to do this, it will be your life's work. It will be your job, right? You need to eat. You need to live. And in an ideal world, the universities on this earth would do that to the people that go to the university. That would happen. But we touched upon that already as well. You cannot do research that doesn't jive with the already prevailing understanding, because if you do that and you are right, you will be, offending the 60-year-old professor that's been teaching that for 30 years, right? He was wrong. She was wrong.
And he's signing your grant, probably. They're probably the ones signing off on your grant, unfortunately, too. Like, these people had the bigger granting agencies, ultimately.
So we're never going to get there. So we're stuck with the few individuals that somehow spend their time and energy that they have doing this, with very, very limited funding, laboratory stuff, etc. If we were to elevate this into a nice research project from a university or a bunch of universities, whatever, that would be a different game. Then we could talk about this so much more, have conferences about it. Well, we're trying, but it's not easy to do, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah. When you have a society that lives on the edges, that is trying to figure something out that's not particularly popular, it's going to be hard.
Yeah. No progress, therefore.
What are you most excited about in the future for the structured atomic model, for the electric universe, for low energy nuclear reactions? Like, what do you see, 5 years out, 10 years out?
I could potentially, hopefully, see a day coming where what we call cold fusion is a reality. So we don't have to worry about all kinds of fossil fuels and whatnot. But I don't believe in a utopic world, right? It's not utopia, then. There will be plenty problems. Humans are good at that. So I do see that happen, maybe in our lifetime, for sure. I do not believe in the hot fusion solution. And I don't think it's feasible, but there you go. Structured atom model, I can only hope that before I say goodbye to this world, whenever that may be, that it will be somewhat accepted or at least talked about in the mainstream circles, but we shouldn't hold our breath there too. So in that sense, I'm a little bit pessimistic. On the other hand, if we choose to, it can be, just a couple of years and it could be mainstream thinking.
Or I mean, even if you just got the mainstream to consider that there should be a structure that's being contemplated, that would be a huge accomplishment. Like, regardless of whether it takes this exact same incarnation that you've laid out in your book, or whether just some of the ideas start to even be, considered. I think it goes without saying that a material basis for reality would be useful.
There is a German fellow, I forgot his name now, but he does deal with the structure of the nucleus completely from mainstream thinking and models and perspective. So he works on that. I forgot the name. Well, I will look it up later. I will send it to you when I find it. So there are some people that do this, and they do get, the attention and the credit from the universities and whatnot. But there is very, very little attention for it. I'm not sure why. I'm really not sure. Maybe because it's in between the chemists and the physicists, right? So the chemists, that was science. I'm sorry, physicists, but the chemists were the science not too long ago. And then somehow, some way, suddenly physics came along and said, we are the crown jewel in science, right? So, or cosmology, I think it became even. But so they took it away. But it's the nucleus and the makeup, it's right in the center between physics and chemistry, right in the center. So it's no man's land, I like to say. So nobody goes to no man's land. Well, almost nobody.
Well, yeah, hopefully at the very least, more and more people will be jumping into no man's land and coming up with ways of looking at it like you've done. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I really appreciate that you have spearheaded that quest, and it seems like there's a lot of enthusiasm for the work you're doing, and
for understanding what lies beyond the mathematics and what actually can be said to be happening. And it is such an important part of science to not just talk about the dynamics of how something happens, but to actually talk about what is the event itself.
What's the mechanism?
What is the mechanism? And so I think that anyone who is focused on understanding mechanism is doing work that is absolutely vital, because it's that way of thinking.
And this is helpful, but it's very difficult to make that step from pure analytical fundamental science to something really practical that humans can use. So the structured atom model is no different. But if you start to understand the structure better, how it fits together, how the whole periodic table works, so your understanding increases and simplified. Now you can figure it out, and that will in the end be useful to have different technologies of nuclear science, like that we touched upon. Right now, it's too big a jump for me even to say, right, that's how to do it. This is where it's hiding. That's what we need to find. Then I would have already done it. But this is how it always works. That's how it worked in the past, and that's how it will work now and in the future.
I think we'll get there. I mean, I think a really beautiful analogy for what's happening right now with nuclear material science, or just with atomic material science, that happened in the past was genetics. Because for many years, I would say for 100 years, we understood genetic processes, heritability. There were traits, right? It goes all the way back to this monk growing these peas or something, right? And he's like, there's heritable traits and we can combine them in this way. But we didn't have a material, physical basis for it until really a few decades ago with the...
almost 100 years now.
Is it? Gosh.
You could even argue who cares what the DNA looks like? I can manipulate it, I can use it, right? So that's the same thing.
But we've gotten much better at using and manipulating it. If you look at the biotechnology revolution, having that material basis has allowed for the physical manipulation, the understanding of binding domains and different catalytic processes that actually occur in histones, and really understanding how the cell does its magic. I think that a lot of really cool technology has come out of having a material understanding of that very well understood abstract process of heritability. Yeah, we understand all the mathematics and everything of how heritability happens, but we didn't have a material basis. And once we did, boom, it unlocks this whole series of technologies that we're now profiting from, or threatening ourselves with, however you look at it.
Yeah.
This is one that you will like with your biology background, and for the love of God, I can't remember where I read it. I'm sort of paraphrasing now, but there was this ancient understanding, I think it came from India or that neck of the woods, but could be wrong there, that says all we need to do is study the human body and it will reveal all the secrets of the universe. You know, all the secrets that we have within us, like a cell structure and the processes, whether they're chemical or maybe even nuclear, right? I mean, the makeup, how things function, how cells talk to each other, but everything is there. Everything is within the human body to understand the cosmos. So that's just one of those little things that somehow stuck in my mind.
I love that.
Oh, I think that that's in biology in general. I think that the living creatures, the creatures that have the eyes with which the universe contemplates itself, are the models for what the universe is. You know, we had a really interesting conversation with Donald Hoffman a couple weeks ago about the emergence of consciousness, and it's like the idea that awareness is the sum total of all objects that come together into a progressively larger and larger object, which is also aware. And so if you can figure out the mechanics of one object that's aware, or one human, or one cat, or one whatever, then maybe you can understand a solar system or a galaxy or something larger than that, because it's hard to believe that we're not inside of a living body. Like, how else could it be? All of these things are related to each other. They're all electrical in nature. They're all physical in nature.
But a body is connected, right? I mean, every cell in our body is connected to every other cell in the end, right?
Yeah.
That's a unity. That's a whole. And the awareness is there somehow. It's a play between those things. Now, just to make it, because where does it start? Where does consciousness or awareness start? At what level? That you could ask, and I'm sure you've asked that question. And if you do it in the structured atom model, so the smallest things would be protons and electrons. And in my mind, electrons are the connection between two protons. So that may be a very flawed comparison, but the electron is the thing that where the awareness should reside, if you will, because it connects those two protons. So maybe that will be helpful. But that is, again, for me, a question in the end that, you know, what is consciousness? What is awareness? Or what is a proton? Or where do they come from? And why are they all the same? You know, who did that? That is a creation question. And that is where I always draw the line. Look, you know, that is, I'm too little, I'm too small to even try to go there. So,
Hypothesis non-fingo. I like that. I mean, this has been a fascinating conversation. I wanna get back on the phone with you a year from now and see how things have moved and what's developed. I think that it's a field that is always on the verge of promise.
Yes, there's a huge promise in many ways. I think, but it's also slow progress. We talked about that for many reasons.
Yeah.
And this is not something that you think about it for a couple of hours and, what do you know? You got it, right? The eureka! I know it all now. That will never happen. It will never come, right? It's a continuous process of evolving awareness, I guess. And it's a pretty journey. There you go.
Well, we're glad to have talked to you, and people can find your book is on Amazon.
Book is to be found, for example, on Amazon, but there are other online sales things. I don't do much with that. The publisher takes care of all that. There's a website from the publisher as well, Curtis Press, for those that want to. So you can order the book there.
And the book is Structured Atomic Model.
The book is called, let me just show it off. It's called The Nature of the Atom. And the subtitle would be An Introduction to the Structured Atom Model. So.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. And we'll have a link for that in the description.
Where can people, if people want to collaborate or they want to get involved in the developments of the structured atom, can they get in touch with you, or do you do social media or anything like that?
We're all volunteers. We have a small group we call the SAM team, for lack of a better term there. 4 or 5 people there. We're doing things. We're the authors. We're doing all that stuff, trying to come up with a proper connection to nuclear physics. Also, like I said, working on experiments in the cold fusion realm. So that's the things that we do. If people feel they want to participate in that, well, sure, you can contact me and we can see if there's some resonance between us and maybe we can do something. That is how the Green team entirely grew on its own, if you will, person by person, slowly. So it's not very quick. We're totally ready for participation or cooperation with other parties. But the only thing we're not looking for is debating more models, if you will, right? So we're not saying we're the end all and be all, we have it perfectly. I'm not saying other people are wrong. Maybe they are more right than I ever could be. But it's no use to keep debating the models. We're working with this model. We have a good reason for that. It's workable. We can do it. We make the progress. If we ever come to a point that is too limiting or it's wrong, or we encounter somebody that has better ideas or far more evolved ideas, we'll be very keen on working on listening with that person. But debating models is no use, right? And if people want to do structure of the neutrino or structure of the electron or the structure of the proton, I wish them all the best. And I mean that sincerely, right? I wish them all the best to make progress there. But we cannot do it. We have to limit somewhere, somewhat. It's too much. It's already such a broad topic.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right on. Yeah, I can appreciate that. So, folks, if you want to help out, then get in touch. If you got your own models, do them somewhere else.
And I think that's reasonable because at some point you get so many voices and everybody's got their own opinion, and it's just like you gotta.
Well, that's what it devolves into. Goes into indeed. It's just an opinion in the end, and that is no use.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, this is wonderful. Thank you so much.
It's been really fascinating.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thanks, Edo. We'll talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Take care.